Hey, Wide Awake family. If you see this, it's your sign to smash that like button. Yes, you listening right now. That way YouTube shows you more amazing stories like this one. We love you all. Now enjoy the stories.
The way he suggested the viewpoint sounded almost sweet, like he was showing me some hidden corner of the world he cared about. He said it was peaceful, quiet, a place to clear your head from everything loud and messy. I didn't overthink it at first. I just assumed it was one of those slightly dramatic date ideas people use to stand out. Something different from coffee or cinema or walks around busy streets. The drive there already felt a little strange, though. The road narrowed more and more, the streetlights fading until it was mostly trees and open darkness. My phone signal flickered in and out, and he didn't seem bothered by it at all. He just kept driving like this route was familiar, like he'd done it plenty of times before. When we finally stopped, the silence hit heavy. Not calm silence. That weird kind where you feel too aware of every tiny movement. The car engine ticked softly as it cooled, and the distant sound of wind brushing leaves echoed through the open space. He smiled and stepped out like this was normal, like he brought dates here all the time. I followed slowly, trying to make my posture look relaxed, even though my stomach had already started twisting. The view wasn't even as impressive as he hyped it up to be. Just a wide stretch of dark land with barely visible city lights in the far distance. He walked a little ahead and started pacing around, scanning the ground like he was trying to find something specific. I didn't ask yet. I just watched. Then he bent down and started dating. Not casually, not playfully, but deliberately pulling at the soil with his hands, scraping small amounts of dirt aside like this action wasn't new, like this exact spot meant something to him already. I laughed nervously at first, asking what he was doing, trying to keep the mood light. He didn't reply properly, just muttered something under his breath, something I couldn't fully catch. Then I heard the name. Another woman's name. Soft, almost affectionate, spoken like he was picturing her exactly where he stood. My heart started racing instantly. Something in my brain snapped from curiosity to alarm. There was no context for that name to be here. No memory shared, no story tied to it. Just in digging into the ground while whispering someone else's name like she belonged to that patch of earth. I froze for a second trying to understand what I was witnessing. My mind kept searching for logic that wasn't there. Was he joking? Was he remembering someone? Was this some weird emotional ritual? But his eyes didn't look like memory. They looked focused, calculating, like he wasn't here for the view. He was here for the space. My body went into quiet survival mode without me even realizing it. I stepped back slowly, making sure I didn't trip on uneven ground. Each movement measured, careful not to draw attention to the shift in energy. He kept digging, kept glancing at the ground, kept saying that name like it meant more than just sound. I didn't run right away. I knew sudden movement could change the tone completely. Instead, I pretended to check my phone, muttering something about needing the bathroom, about stepping toward the trees. He barely acknowledged it, still lost in whatever he was doing. The moment my back turned, fear finally took over. I'd moved faster, not sprinting yet, but quick enough to feel distance forming. The ground felt uneven beneath my shoes, gravel crunching with each step. My phone vibrated uselessly with low signal warnings, but I kept it clutched tightly anyway. I didn't look back until I reached the edge of the clearing and saw the car from another angle, half silhouetted, like it belonged to a completely different story. And then I ran. Every step felt heavy, every breath sharp. My mind replaying the image of him kneeling on the ground, dirt on his hands, whispering a stranger's name into the open night. I didn't stop until I reached the roadside, frantic and shaken, waving my phone until one faint bar of signal flashed back to life. My fingers shook as I called for help, barely managing to explain where I was and what I'd seen. Police arrived quicker than I expected, lights slicing through the dark roads. They asked questions calmly, but clearly understood the seriousness the moment I described what he was doing. They moved in teams toward the viewpoint while I stayed back trembling, watching their silhouettes disappear into the path. Minutes dragged painfully slow. Finally, one officer returned, expression tight, confirming they had found evidence of a planned crime scene. Marked spots, tools, notes, things no one should ever prepare alone in the middle of nowhere under the cover of night. And the name I heard. It matched a missing person case already open. My chest went hollow hearing that. The weight of what almost happened settled heavier than any scream ever could. He hadn't just been having a moment. He was preparing, rehearsing, waiting. They arrested him at the scene. I watched from a distance as he was led toward a vehicle, dirt on his clothes, his earlier calm gone completely. He didn't even look at me. Not apology. Not anger. Just emptiness. Like his plan had already failed the second I chose to walk away. Later, back in my live, I sat under bright light while the officers finished taking my statement, confirming details, replaying moments I wished I could erase from memory. But clarity mattered more than comfort. Once they left, silence filled the room again. But this time, silence felt like relief instead of dread. Still, the memory stuck. The way he spoke that name. The way the crowd awaited something that never happened. The way one decision to step back rewrote the night completely. And even now, when someone suggests a secluded place a little too eagerly, a part of me tightens without warning. Not because I'm scared of the dark, but because I remember the night someone tried to introduce me to the space he had already chosen for someone else. It started off normal enough, the way most of these things do. A couple days of messaging, dry jokes, small talk about favorite snacks, pretending we both were slightly bored of swiping culture. She told me she was single, tired of drama, just wanted something real. That line always sounds nice, even when you already half expect it to be scripted. Still, she seemed chilled, not overly intense, not pushing anything too fast, so I agreed to meet. We chose this semi-quiet bar tucked between a takeaway and a nail salon, the type with dim lighting and music low enough that you can hear yourself think. She was already there when I walked in, sat with her bag on the chair beside her, smiling like the night was going to be effortless. I relaxed instantly, thinking, yeah, okay, this might actually be decent. She looked exactly like her photos. Clean, put together, calm energy. Nothing off. Nothing screaming red flag. We ordered drinks and started talking about random life stuff. Work. Music. Boring childhood stories. The usual first date routine that you just float through. A few times, though, her phone buzzed and she'd slide it face down quickly. Not unusual, just noticeably frequent. I ignored it at first, assuming it was group chats or a clingy friend. But the pings kept coming. Every few minutes. Same vibration, same quick flip. She laughed it off, made a little joke about being popular, and I shrugged with a smile. But something about it felt too organized, too rhythmic. Like she was checking in, not just casually responding. Midway through the night, she excused herself to use the bathroom, leaving her phone on the table face down. I didn't mean to snoop, honestly. But as I shifted in my chair, the screen lit up from a new notification. Instinct made my eyes flick over. A calendar popped up. Hourly slots. Names. Times. All lined up one after the other like a tightly packed schedule. 7 p.m., 8 p.m., 9 p.m., 10 p.m. Every single slot filled with different names. Different locations, some highlighted, some marked completed. My chest tightened before my brain caught up. This wasn't just social plans. This was production. She came back quickly and flipped the phone over, but she'd already felt the shift in my posture. She smiled again like everything was fine, but the air had changed slightly. I didn't call it out straight away. I needed to process what I'd seen. Maybe I was overthinking it. Maybe she just had a busy social life. Maybe I imagined the context. But then her other phone buzzed. Another one. This time it was sitting half poking out from her bag. She unzipped it slightly, glanced at the screen, typed something, then put it away again. Double devices. Double notifications. Double urgency. My stomach turned uneasy. I joked lightly about her being booked and busy and asked what the calendar was for. Her response was too smooth, too rehearsed, saying she just liked planning her weeks properly, that she hated being unorganized. But normal planning doesn't look like that. Not hour by hour with strangers. My instincts started screaming louder, a low buzzing voice telling me this wasn't some playful coincidence. I kept my tone calm, but my focus sharpened on every tiny detail. When her phone buzzed again, the screen flashed with another name and a location pin. Same pattern. Same repetition. That's when a man stepped into the bar, scanning the room with frustration written across his face. Not angry by default, just tense. His eyes locked onto her almost immediately, and his jaw tightened as he approached the table. She went rigid, smile fading like someone switched off her performance. He stood there gesturing toward his phone, demanding answers for why she'd taken a deposit and then disappeared on him earlier that day. He wasn't loud enough to cause a scene yet, but the intensity was there, sharp and uncomfortable. I sat frozen, realizing the puzzle pieces linking together perfectly. She wasn't just dating around. She was running a timed operation, and I was in the middle of one slot. She tried calming him, muttering excuses, brushing it aside, but the man pulled up messages, confirmations, scheduling links, everything matching the hourly blocks I'd seen. Suddenly, more eyes turned our way. Waitstaff noticed. People started glancing. Whispers passed across the bar, and then came the unmistakable sound no one ever wants tied to their evening plans. Sirens. Officers entered with firm steps and a focused look, approaching directly like they'd been tipped off long before I even noticed the signs. They spoke quietly but confidently, asking for identification, checking both phones, scanning the booking system she'd been using. They confirmed what the tension already revealed. She'd been running a scam operation through dating apps and private links, scheduling multiple men an hour under false claims, taking upfront money, promising private meetups that either never happened or were misrepresented entirely. Some were being fooled, some were being robbed, some walked away embarrassed and silent. And here I was, half amused earlier that she liked to plan. She sat there trying to mask the panic, but it was clear her structure had collapsed. Police pulled more phones from her bag. Receipts, lists, coded names, even backup schedules for the following week. Men started messaging Lev, still unaware anything had unraveled yet, asking if they were next. It felt surreal watching someone I laughed with an hour earlier become the center of a full-scale operation. Her relaxed charm now clearly a tool, her calm voice a disguise built to keep everything seamless. I answered officers honestly when they asked my side, explaining how I'd met her when I'd noticed what made me uneasy. They nodded, almost unsurprised, as if this pattern had appeared before. She was escorted out while still trying to whisper into her phone, probably attempting damage control even as the situation spiraled. The bar slowly returned to its usual background buzz, but nothing felt normal anymore. My drink sat untouched, my appetite forgotten. Everything that once felt light now tasted strange. I stepped outside into the night air, the neon glow of the sign flickering faintly above, trying to clear my head. The situation replayed on loop. The calendar, the phone swaps, the man's frustration, the sudden shift from flirt to criminal exposure. Back in my live later, I scrolled our chat history, every playful emoji suddenly looking hollow. Her story about wanting something real felt ridiculous in hindsight, like a character she performed for everyone she met. And the weirdest part wasn't that she lied. It was how effortlessly she wore the lie. How natural it sounded. How convincing normal can be when it's rehearsed just enough. Now, when someone says they're single and just looking for a connection, I listen carefully not just to the words, but to the gaps between them. Because sometimes the real schedule isn't the one they showed you. I didn't think much of it when he first joked about how safe my place looked. It felt normal, like random conversation filler when you're still finding your rhythm with someone. I met him through a dating app after a few dry chats and the usual exchange of selfies and dumb memes. He felt charming enough, a little curious, maybe too curious, but I brushed it off because I've met people who just ask loads of questions without realizing how intense it sounds. Our first real meet was at a small corner cafe near my street. Nothing fancy, just somewhere casual where the chairs squeak when you shift too much. He sat opposite me smiling easy, tapping his fingers against the table, complimenting the neighborhood like he already knew it. And that's when the questioning started. Not deep questions about me, not the emotional stuff, just oddly specific ones. He asked what my building entrance was like. Did I have any neighbors close by? If my windows faced the road or the back? He laughed while asking, wrapping it in light humor, making it sound like he was just being overly observant. I answered vaguely, not wanting to overshare, but every response seemed to open up another line of detail he wanted. Does your alarm go off loud or silent? Do you set it every night? Does it connect straight to your phone or a company? Do you ever forget to turn it on? I frowned slightly and made a joke out of it, saying he asked more about my alarm than my personality. He laughed but didn't actually move on. He just rephrased the same curiosity as if it wasn't strange. I went along with it, internally uncomfortable, but trying not to overreact. I've always been the type to convince myself I'm being dramatic, that things aren't that deep. So I let the night flow and didn't lock onto the warning signs glowing right in front of me. He walked me home after, staying slightly behind but still watching the building with interest. I noticed him glance up at the windows, then down at the door lock, then back to me like he was measuring something silently. That feeling followed me inside. Over the next few days, messages from him stayed oddly focused around safety. If I'd remembered to set my alarm. If I had someone with me. If my place felt quiet. Every time I replied cautiously, he replied with casual ease like nothing he was saying crossed a line. I started leaving replies shorter. A few nights later, I heard noise in the hallway. Soft shuffling. The type you could mistake for neighbors, but my stomach said otherwise. I sat frozen on the edge of my bed listening, trying to tell if I'd imagined it. Nothing else followed, just silence. The next morning, my neighbor knocked and asked if everything was okay last night because they'd seen someone near the entrance trying the lock before walking away. I thanked them and tried to keep calm, but inside a slow unease began to expand. I checked my door. Scratch marks faint but noticeable. I didn't message him about it. I just watched the space around me more carefully, paying attention to movement, sounds, patterns. A few days later, my phone buzzed with an unknown number asking if I knew someone named after him. I replied carefully asking why. The response was simple but heavy. Police investigation. My heartbeat doubled. They explained his name had been linked to a group targeting homes through dating apps. Men who'd matched with women specifically to gather details about their properties, alarm systems, neighborhood quiet times, entry routes. Everything mapped through casual conversation. An entire organized ring using dating platforms as scouting maps. My breath felt tight as pieces slammed together in clarity. His questions, his curiosity, his phrasing. How he'd lingered outside my place. How he asked about which nights I stayed out late. The officer arrived that same afternoon requesting a statement. They asked what he'd said, how often, what topics came up. I spilled everything with clarity I didn't think I had. The cafe, the walk home, the messaging pattern, how his focus never left security. They told me other women had similar experiences. Other flats, other houses, some lucky enough to notice early, some not as quick. Properties burgled within days of dates. Patterns pulled from stolen data. Ring dismantled slowly as details accumulated. He'd already been picked up that morning along with others he worked alongside. Devices seized. Records confirmed. Home photos stored like trophies. Casual talk turned blueprint. I sat there staring at my phone history like it belonged to someone else, replaying his laugh. The way he pretended to care but only measured spaces around him. Every mention of safety now echoed with intent. That night, back in my live, I double-checked every lock. Every window, every shadow felt louder. Not fear, but awareness sharpened into survival. I deleted every photo I'd sent, every message, every trace of connection. Even though it felt like the damage had already been managed, the closeness he'd achieved inside my digital life felt heavier than I could explain. Days passed and news articles started linking his name publicly. Caution posts shared widely. Warnings sent across neighborhood threads. His face circulating not as charming or flirty, but as calculated and dangerous. I tried not to read too much, but curiosity crept in. His network, his methods, how long he'd been doing it. How many people thought they were building a connection while feeding information to a stranger planning entry? It made my skin crawl how close it had been to crossing into my reality physically. I stopped replying fully to new matches for a while. Kind words felt suspicious. Curiosity felt tinted. I needed space to feel normal again. Not everything felt threatening anymore, but everything felt clearer. When someone asks too much too fast, I listen now. When instincts whisper, I don't silence them. And when someone starts mapping my world with questions that feel slightly off, I don't laugh it away. I step back.
Hey guys, really sorry to interrupt. If you're still listening, then you're enjoying the story so far. And if you are enjoying, then please hit that like button. That's all I ask of you. Thanks so much. Now back to the stories.
I should have clocked it sooner. The way her phone never stayed still for more than a minute. But at the time, I just thought she was one of those people who couldn't sit without scrolling, constantly refreshing, checking something, pretending her screen was more interesting than the person sitting 2 feet away. We met at this tiny late-night diner that smelled like fried onions and sugary waffles, the kind of place that feels comforting until you notice how tired the chairs look. She arrived smiling, energetic, acting like we'd already known each other forever, touching my arm slightly when she laughed, keeping the conversation light and playful. And I'll admit I felt relaxed. Too relaxed. Like I didn't need to guard my thoughts or watch my words. She had that vibe where you stop questioning and just go with whatever. But every few minutes, her hand kept drifting down to her phone in this unnatural sort of rhythm. Not casual like normal, more urgent, more deliberate. She'd tilt the screen toward herself, slide something out from the side, tap, then close the case quickly and place it face down. I didn't think too much of it until I noticed the tiny plastic edge between her fingers. A SIM card. She wasn't just checking her phone. She was swapping the identity behind it. I didn't say anything at first, just watched out of the corner of my eye as she slid one out, pressed another in, rebooted quietly, then continued typing like nothing happened. 10 minutes later, she did it again, and again, each time smoother than the last, like this was a routine she'd mastered from repetition. My stomach started building that slow, uneasy pressure. I asked casually if her phone was broken or something. She laughed it off too quick, said she had work stuff to manage, but the laughter didn't reach her eyes. It sounded like a cover line she used too many times already. The night carried on anyway. She kept steering the conversation toward topics about charity, helping people, how the world was unfair, and some families needed more assistance than others. It felt oddly performative, like she was setting a narrative even if I wasn't part of it yet. Then she mentioned a page she ran. Emergency fundraising. Support for struggling families. Urgent medical situations. She said she even raised serious money through it and showed me what looked like a basic website preview on her screen. The problem was, nothing about the page felt genuine. It looked rushed, recycled images, generic headlines. Everything felt stitched together fast without real backbone. And the longer she scrolled, the more I noticed the donation methods rotated through different numbers and different account names. Like the Sims. Like the phone. Like the identity never actually stayed the same. Later, when she thought I wasn't paying attention, she slipped back into card swapping again behind the table edge. Fast fingers. Calm face. New number. New personality online. And that's when I knew this wasn't random tech fussiness. This was deliberate. My chest tightened as everything connected slowly. She wasn't raising funds for emergencies. She was manufacturing them. Still, I didn't confront her right away. I just quietly observed, letting her words play out while my mind replayed every tiny detail. The switching rhythm, the constant typing, the way she never let her phone fully leave her grip. Not once. Then the turning point hit. A man stepped into the diner holding his phone high, eyes scanning until they landed straight on her like a locked signal. His jaw looked tense, shoulders stiff, frustration plastered across his face. She noticed instantly, and her posture snapped rigid. That soft charm she'd worn all evening cracked like thin glass. He walked closer, voice raised enough for nearby tables to start listening, waving the screen toward her with messages and bank confirmations flashing across it. Donations sent, fake promises. Emotional hooks written in long paragraphs. Her page name at the top. The whole place went quiet without meaning to. I sat there frozen while he pointed toward the site and demanded answers for why his money vanished after he tried to help a sick child that didn't exist. His voice shook more from betrayal than anger, and his eyes looked confused more than aggressive. She tried brushing it off, claiming misunderstandings, saying he must have mistaken the page, but he kept showing proof after proof. Every screenshot linked directly back to her. To that moment. To the sim. To the swaps. People at the table started whispering now, glancing at each other, realizing something wasn't just awkward, it was criminal. Then the sirens rolled in. Slow at first, distant, then right outside. Police entered and approached our table with intent, already asking for identification before any explanation could even be formed. They inspected her phone, pulled up the rotating numbers, traced the IP addresses, followed the pattern she'd been sliding through all night, right under everyone's nose. Her devices were taken, extra phones uncovered in her bag, backup SIMs tucked carefully inside a makeup pouch. It stopped being subtle. It became obvious how calculated her routine was. She admitted only fragments at first, pretending like it wasn't that serious, but as the evidence stacked up, the story collapsed completely. Dates had been her cover time. Safe hours in public spaces where she blended into normalcy while running donation scams behind the screen. Her fake stories touched emotions deep enough that strangers felt compelled to send money. Sickness, poverty, fake heartbreak packaging designed to pull people in, all curated from her phone while she laughed over fries and talked about life goals. I felt disgusted, not just at the act, but how smoothly she wore normality while exploiting empathy. The man stood nearby silent now, tears edging the corners of his eyes, not from rage but humiliation. The realization of being tricked hurt deeper than any amount lost. She was escorted away after more questions and more silent stares, and the diner's old buzz seemed broken, like the energy of that space finally acknowledged something ugly had happened inside it. I didn't finish the meal. I didn't even take a sip of the drink I ordered. I just stepped out into the cool night air, feeling like I'd watched a magic trick reveal its darkest mechanism. Back in my live, the quiet pressed harder than usual. I checked my notifications out of instinct, even though I knew she wouldn't send anything anymore. Her name sat there like a closed file, a version of someone that only existed for manipulation. And what stuck with me most wasn't just the scam. It was how normal she looked while doing it. How comfortable she felt using connection as camouflage. Sometimes the scariest part isn't danger. It's how invisible it looks until it's already wrapped itself around you. I didn't expect a random evening link up to end like a true crime clip, but that's exactly how it felt. One second I was laughing over cheap fries and neon lights. The next I was standing frozen watching him get pinned to asphalt by strangers who already knew his name. We met at this small riverside arcade space that tried really hard to look cool without actually being cool. Blinking machines, sticky floors, loud music that made conversation half impossible. He said it was fun and different, and I liked the idea of somewhere not too serious. I showed up thinking it would just be another awkward first meet where we pretend we don't care and then slowly figure out if we do. He seemed normal at first, playful, chatty, a little cocky but not unbearable. He kept talking about moves he was making, side money, big things coming soon, all said with that vague confidence people use when they want to sound important without explaining anything real. I didn't impress him. Figured he just wanted to look impressive. We played a few games, laughed, shared stupid stories from school days, and for a while it felt fine. Not amazing, not awful, just fine. Then his phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen and his whole posture shifted like someone flicked a switch. He said he needed fresh air and walked toward the exit without waiting for my reply. I thought nothing of it at first, just stayed behind scrolling on my phone while the noise of the arcade swallowed everything else. A few minutes passed and I realized he hadn't come back. Curiosity tugged, and I stepped outside too, moving toward the dim side area near the benches overlooking the river. That's when I heard his voice. Too clear, too confident. He wasn't on speaker. He wasn't joking. He was talking to someone beside him, not through the phone like I originally thought. My steps slowed as I caught fragments of what he was saying, not meant for anyone outside his world to hear. He was boasting, plain and reckless about how smooth he'd been moving things lately. Talking about routes like they were shortcuts on a map, bragging how nothing ever got caught, how payments lined up perfectly, how everything passed through like clockwork. My chest tightened instantly. He laughed softly while naming places and times like it was casual chat, like he wasn't describing something dangerous. The way he spoke felt rehearsed, natural, like this wasn't his first time giving a breakdown of shady operations. I pressed closer to the wall without meaning to, trying to see who he was talking to, but I only spotted a shadowy figure half turned away, nodding like this conversation was normal currency. He went on about how smooth the whole thing ran, about how changing paths kept everything clean, how easy it was to move product without anyone knowing. That's when the weight of the situation really settled. This wasn't confidence talk. This wasn't exaggeration. This was someone careless enough to brag openly about criminal moves while casually standing 10 feet away from the person he invited on a date. I stepped back quietly, my heart racing. I needed distance. I needed clarity. I needed air that wasn't saturated with his voice. And then chaos ripped through the stillness. A sudden rush of movement, heavy footsteps, multiple hands grabbing in coordinated motion, voices sharp and commanding echoing through the open space. Within seconds, he was slammed face down, arms pulled behind him, his shock finally replacing that cocky calm. Undercover officers emerged like ghosts from the background I didn't even realize were there. Plain clothes, focused expressions, no hesitation. They already knew. His eyes darted wildly as wrist restraints tightened. The other figure he'd been speaking with vanished into the shuffle, also being detained further down. The entire riverside froze as people nearby stared, murmured, filmed, stepped backward. I couldn't move. Every nerve screamed at once, yet my legs refused to listen. One officer approached me gently, asking if I knew him, how long I had been with him, if I heard anything that might help explain the situation. I nodded slowly, still processing the fact that I'd been laughing with someone involved in stuff far darker than anything he ever hinted at. They explained briefly that he'd been under monitoring for some time due to ongoing operations involving transport of illegal substances and network coordination. Words I never imagined hearing while standing next to the guy who just bought me fries. The contrast felt unreal. He looked up once, eyes shifting from shock to empty realization. Not regret. Not fear. Just caught. He wasn't even trying to deny anything. Officers escorted him away while crowds whispered and shuffled backward, like space itself tried to distance from the tension. The arcade lights continued blinking like nothing happened. Music still played faintly, but a line had been carved through the night. I sat down on the nearest bench trying to regulate my breathing. My hands shook slightly as the adrenaline drained but refused to disappear completely. I kept replaying his voice in my head, how easily he bragged, how casually he treated something that destroyed lives. How close I'd stood. A stranger's path almost crossed too far into mine. Later that night, I walked home slowly, the river reflecting distorted city lights like shattered thoughts. Every sound felt sharper. Every shadow seemed heavier. My phone buzzed with messages from people I didn't have energy for. Back in my live, I collapsed onto the bed staring at the ceiling, processing how someone could look so normal and still move through life surrounded by lies and danger. How someone could talk about the legal routes like they were weekend errands. I checked his name out of curiosity. Articles already started surfacing. Old posts. Subtle clues that made sense only now. People discussing his name like they'd known something I'd only just uncovered. I didn't reply to any leftover messages. I just let the silence exist. Sometimes silence feels safer than explanation. And the strangest part wasn't even the arrest. It was how calm the night tried to continue as if nothing happened, like only I felt the shift as deeply as I did. Even now, when someone steps aside mid-conversation and lowers their voice too confidently, my stomach tightens without warning. Not fear, just memory. I should have known something was off when she insisted on the beach as our first proper meet. Not a coffee, not a walk through town, straight to sand and open sky like we were already in some summer montage. I told myself it sounded nice though, like a reset from gray pavements and boring routines. I grabbed a hoodie, threw my phone in my pocket, and headed out thinking this would just be another forgettable date that fades into a scroll of old pics. She was already there when I arrived, sat on a blanket with her shoes kicked off, smiling like she'd waited all day for this exact moment. The waves were steady, the breeze slightly cold, but not unpleasant. It felt peaceful. Too peaceful maybe, but I ignored that. We talked about random stuff at first. Music we kinda liked, places we wanted to visit, stupid childhood memories. She laughed easy, almost too easy, and I remember thinking she had this way of making people feel comfortable quickly. Like she knew how to speedrun trust. I didn't clock it then. I just soaked up the chill vibe and let my guard soften. She kept asking to take photos though. Not just selfies. Not just cute scenery ones. She kept turning the camera toward me, saying the light looked good, that the waves made a nice backdrop. I laughed it off, thinking she was just a bit obsessed with aesthetics. Every so often, she'd send something on her phone and then go right back to scrolling or typing like she was mid-conversation with someone else. I didn't think much of it until I leaned over to grab my drink and saw my face staring back at me from her screen, but not from today. It was a photo she'd taken earlier, trimmed, edited slightly, captioned with a username I didn't recognize. I frowned, confused, and gently asked why she'd already uploaded pictures of me when we were literally still hanging out. She brushed it off fast, said it was just for fun, said people loved real faces, said it helped her keep track of who she matched with. It sounded flimsy, but delivered so casually that I almost dropped the concern. Almost. Then my phone buzzed. A notification from an unknown number popped up with my picture attached. Same one she'd just taken. Same angle. Same lighting. Except the message asking if I was still interested in helping him feel less lonely. I stared at the screen thinking it had to be random. Coincidence. Some glitch connecting dots that weren't connected. But it wasn't. Before I could even process it properly, a man started walking toward us from further down the beach. Older, sculpted frustration in his posture. Every step heavier than the last. His eyes didn't drift around. They locked straight onto her like she owed him something. She noticed too. Her body language changed instantly. Smile stiff. Fingers clenched around her phone. The airy, relaxed energy drained like a plug was pulled. He stopped just a few feet away from us, voice raised, anger raw, pointing at the screen of his phone before gesturing toward her. I didn't need to catch every word to understand what was happening. His face showed betrayal, embarrassment, hurt, the kind you don't fake. He held the phone toward me for a split second and I froze. My face, smiling, profile picture, caption hitting at promises I never made, messages I never typed, fake conversations under my identity reaching out to him with personal lines that weren't mine. She'd been using my photos, my face, my presence to pull money and attention from strangers older than me, selling some fantasy version of connection that didn't exist. That realization hit like cold water straight down the spine. The man started getting louder, demanding answers, demanding refunds, demanding explanations. Beachgoers started noticing, eyes turning, people slowing down. A lifeguard glancing over nervously, the energy heavy and uncomfortable. She tried to calm him, but the panic in her eyes finally broke through the surface. Not the cute, calm version of herself I'd been laughing with earlier, but someone caught mid-lie with no easy escape. My phone vibrated again. Another message. Another stranger responding to yet another fake profile using my face with ridiculous flirty lines I hadn't typed. The disgust bubbled deep and painful. I stepped back instinctively, distancing myself from both of them while the crowd slowly tightened around the scene. The older man's voice grew harsher as he demanded what she promised him and why his money vanished after sending it. People whispered. Some stared openly. Others filmed. Then sirens cut through the beach air. Police arrived quickly, assessing the situation, separating everyone, asking questions, collecting phones, scanning screens. One officer approached me directly asking if I knew she'd been operating a scam. My answer came out faster than my thoughts. I barely knew her. Just met her. Just smiled beside her on a blanket an hour prior. They checked her phone and facial recognition confirmed multiple accounts under different names, but all using my photos or slightly modified versions. They scrolled through threads of desperate messages from men who believed they were talking to someone who cared, someone real. She stood there barely responding, her confident social sparkle gone completely. The officer read through a list of charges while confiscating her devices and escorting her away. The older man stood nearby, still visibly shaken, still fuming, not sure whether to be angry or embarrassed. I felt sorry for him even though it wasn't my fault any of this happened. Looking around, I realized how many people had witnessed that moment of exposure. How normal a beach date turned chaotic within seconds. How easily someone's identity can be twisted for selfish gain without them ever knowing until it's too late. My face no longer felt like mine. It felt like a tool she'd used. Even after they left, the beach didn't feel calm again. The waves kept moving. The sand stayed warm, but my chest didn't settle the same way it had earlier. Later, back in my live, I scrolled through social apps checking if any of my photos had been copied elsewhere. Every reflection felt slightly off, like I wasn't sure who was using my image now or where it could appear next. I didn't lock her profile straight away. I just stared at it for a while, trying to remember the version she first showed me. The version that smiled warmly and spoke softly. The version that didn't exist. Days passed, and I still found myself thinking about that moment when the stranger walked onto the sand and everything cracked open. Not dramatic like in movies. Just raw reality ripping through what should have been simple. Now, whenever someone takes my photo a little too eagerly, I don't smile, I step back. I woke up in that half-dream haze where your mind isn't ready to accept what your eyes are seeing, like you're still floating between sleep and reality. The room was dim, soft orange glow from the street lamps sneaking through the curtains, and for a second I thought I was imagining it. But then my eyes focused properly, and I saw his face hovering far too close to mine, serious and concentrated, not the soft, sleepy expression you expect from someone sharing your bed. His hand was on my phone, not just holding it, guiding it. My own thumb was lifted gently from the dovette, pressed down onto the screen by his fingers. Deliberate, careful, patient. The tiny vibration from the phone unlocking buzzed quietly, and I felt my whole body freeze without making a sound. I didn't move at first. My heart beat louder than it should have, but I forced steady breathing like I was still asleep. I watched through half-closed eyes as my phone opened, and his posture shifted slightly in relief, like he just cracked something important. He scrolled slowly, not casually, intent, his other hand hovering above the screen, tapping into apps I recognized as mine. Banking, messages, photo galleries, things that held pieces of me I never handed out. I remember thinking this cannot be happening. People don't behave like this. Not someone who laughed with you an hour earlier. Not someone who slept beside you like everything was normal. But it was happening. And the worst part was how calm he looked. Like this wasn't the first time he'd done it. I closed my eyes again just enough to look undisturbed while my brain scrambled for control. I needed proof. I needed him to not realize I'd caught him. I moved my head slightly like I was adjusting in my sleep and allowed my hand to slip free. He noticed and paused briefly, eyes narrowing, before repositioning my thumb again and carrying on. That's when I knew this wasn't curiosity. This was calculated. He took screenshots. He typed notes. He copied details, usernames, fragments of information that could only be used for one thing. Not anything genuine, not anything protective. Something invasive that wasn't his right to touch. Minutes felt like hours. My mind replayed everything from the night before. How comfortable I'd felt. How natural his presence seemed. Every joke, every smile, and now this silent theft of my identity unfolding inches from my face. Finally, he set the phone down and rolled back under the covers like nothing happened. His breathing shifted slowly, pretending to sleep. But the damage had already been done. I didn't move right away. I waited until his breathing fell into proper rhythm and then carefully slid out of bed. My phone rested on the bedside table exactly where he placed it, screen still faintly warm. I picked it up and went to the bathroom, locking the door softly behind me. My hands trembled as I checked what he'd accessed. Notifications. Apps opened in the background. Files touched. I felt sick scrolling through the evidence he left behind without even caring to cover it fully. I quietly started recording on my phone, whispering what I saw, capturing the screen, the access history, the changes he'd made, aware that this wasn't just about safety anymore. This was about protecting myself before things escalated. I didn't wake him. I didn't panic outwardly. I gathered my things with slow, controlled movements and stepped into the hallway like someone trying not to stir a fragile scene. By the time I pulled my coat on, my adrenaline was so high I barely felt cold. Outside, the air slapped reality back into my lungs. I called the police right then and explained everything with honesty, sending over the video proof, timestamps, and my exact location. Officers told me to stay nearby and keep distance from him. By the time daylight started creeping through the sky, patrol cars had already arrived. They knocked. They spoke. They entered. And soon after, he walked out with hands restrained, eyes avoiding mine completely. I felt no satisfaction, just disbelief. Authorities later confirmed he'd been attempting to access my identity details to create accounts under my name. Loans, transactions, digital footprints that could destroy my credit before I even realized anything went wrong. They explained phrases and terms I barely understood while trying to keep my head straight. My phone was checked thoroughly, accounts secured, passwords changed. Alerts placed on my personal records. My entire sense of safety had to be rebuilt from the ground up. The charge they brought against him wasn't small. Hacking, identity theft, premeditated digital entry. His devices were seized. His laptop, his drives, his backup storage. Everything that carried traces of how long this had been going on. And it hadn't been just me. There were others. Photos of hands, faces, names, data trails from previous people he'd sat beside pretending to care. Every fake affectionate gesture now dissolved into a clear pattern of betrayal. I sat in my mutated sense of space, realizing how close someone can be physically while planning to dismantle your life quietly. When the police finally returned my phone, I barely recognized it as the harmless thing I once kept beside my pillow. Now it felt like a vault I had to protect at all times, a portal that could be entered without warning if trust slipped again. Back in my live, the silence felt different, not peaceful. Alert, every miter sound sharp, every shadow slightly threatening. I kept replaying the memory of his fingers guiding my hand, the softness of the movement compared to the cruelty of intent behind it. Dating stopped feeling casual after that. It stopped feeling fun. It started feeling like something you approach with guarded steps instead of laughter. And worst of all, the quiet, haunted moments happened before sleep, when I laid there and wondered how long he would have kept going if I hadn't woken up at that exact second. How many more details we've left my control? I don't know how I let myself believe a family dinner invite on a third date was normal, but at the time it weirdly felt flattering. Like I'd skipped 10 boring stages and jumped straight into something serious without even trying. She said her family wanted to meet me, said they were big on hosting and loved bringing people together. I laughed it off, told myself maybe she was just extra like that. Maybe this was her version of casual. The address she sent looked decent enough. Quiet street, rows of similar houses, front gardens that had seen better days but still held up. When I arrived, the sky was fading pink and gray, that in-between evening vibe where things softened without you noticing. I knocked and she opened the door almost immediately, smiling wide, like she'd been waiting behind it the entire time. The first thing I noticed was the silence. Not the calm, peaceful silence you get in cozy homes, but a heavy, empty quiet that seems too still for any place claiming to hold a whole family dinner. I stepped inside anyway, trying not to overthink the chill crawling up the back of my neck. The house smelled faintly like dust and cheap air freshener. No cooking smell, no voices, no clatter of plates, nothing, just a soft echo of our footsteps against hard floors. She waved it off quickly, saying everyone was just upstairs finishing bits and would be down soon. I nodded, pretending that made sense even though my gut was already side-eyeing the situation. Then I noticed the furniture. None of it matched. A red velvet sofa, clearly from another decade, pushed against a side wall. A dining table that looked far too fancy for the rest of the space sitting awkwardly in the middle. Mismatched chairs surrounding it like they'd been collected one by one from random homes. A tall lamp leaning slightly like it didn't belong where it stood. It looked less like a family home and more like a storage room built from impulse. She guided me into the living area, chatting casually, asking if I wanted a drink as if this was a normal setup. But the longer I stood there, the more obvious it became that nothing about this space made sense. There were no family photos, no personal touches, no warmth, no signs that anyone actually lived here. I sat down slowly while she wandered off toward the kitchen pretending to prepare food that clearly wasn't being prepared. The sound of cupboards opening and closing echoed sharply through the hallway, amplifying that strange emptiness. I glanced around, noticing small scratches on the floor near heavy items, like things had been dragged instead of naturally placed. Some pieces still have faded labels underneath, like shop tags ripped half off and forgotten. My chest tightened. This wasn't her family dinner. This was someone else's property. She returned carrying plates that had no meaningful contents, again acting as if nothing appeared unusual. But the vibe was now too unsettling to ignore. I asked where everyone was, and she vaguely gestured upward, repeating that they'd be down soon. I didn't question her too aggressively yet, just kept observing. And then the knock came. Sharp, loud, unexpected. She froze mid-step, face shifting slightly, like a crack had finally formed. A second knock followed almost immediately, firmer this time. Before she even reached the door, voices filtered through the wood, asking who was inside. Her expression tightened further. She glanced at me for a split second like I was somehow part of the problem. She hesitated briefly before opening it just enough to peek through. The voices outside were calmer but authoritative. Neighbors wanting to know why there were lights on in a house that had been empty for weeks. Why unfamiliar people weren't inside. Why furniture that didn't belong there had suddenly appeared. My stomach flipped instantly. She attempted to brush them off, acting defensive, claiming she had permission, claiming the house was being used temporarily. But the words didn't carry conviction. They didn't match the mess. It didn't match the space. Within minutes, I heard another car pull up. Slower, heavier. The unmistakable sound of authority arriving. Police. They entered through the front door with measured steps, eyes scanning the space before even properly addressing anyone. Their faces already unreadable if they had seen something like this more than once. They asked for identification, proof of residence, reason for being inside. She scrambled through her bag, pulling out loose papers that clearly didn't justify anything. Her earlier confidence had evaporated, leaving her flustered and irritated. They spoke quietly at first, then began inspecting the furniture more closely, noting that many items matched recent reports of stolen property from nearby houses and storage units. Couches, tables, lamps. Pieces that vanished months ago now clustered awkwardly into this empty shell of a home. Suddenly, the narrative snapped into focus. This wasn't family dinner. This was illegal occupation staged around stolen comfort. She hadn't invited me to meet relatives. She'd invited me into a space she had no right to be in. A fake life fit together with things taken from other people. The neighbors watched from their windows as officers continued questioning her, documenting everything, matching serial numbers and descriptions to reported thefts. I stood on the sidelines, stunned by how quickly the situation unraveled. She tried to justify it as harmless, temporary, desperate, but the reality was obvious. She was squatting in a house that didn't belong to her, populating it with stolen furniture to sell a version of stability that didn't exist. They arrested her shortly after, fastening cuffs around her wrists while running through formal explanations. She didn't cry, didn't shout, just stared ahead, eyes flat, as if she had already accepted where this night was going from the beginning. I barely moved while they escorted her past the mismatched dining set she tried to use as a stage prop for intimacy. The warped sofa that never belonged there. The dinner that was never real. An officer approached me afterwards, asking how I came to be there. I explained everything clearly from the invite to the moment I stepped inside. They nodded, relieved that I wasn't involved. Relieved that I wasn't another layer in whatever scheme she'd built around herself. As the house emptied, the absence felt even larger than before. Vacant walls, wrong floors, wrong energy, like the room exhaled once the illusion was removed. I stepped outside and the night air felt sharper than when I arrived. Neighbors murmured quietly, glancing toward the chaos that had temporarily interrupted their peaceful street. I felt I had walked into the wrong version of someone's life and barely managed to walk back out again. Later that evening, back in my live, I replayed the entire thing in my head. The invite, the fake warmth, the silent house. How easily I'd accepted a story that didn't even line up logically. My phone buzzed again with old messages from her, all casual and normal like they belonged to some parallel timeline instead of what actually happened. I didn't block straight away. I just stared at them like they were data from someone else's life. And even now, whenever someone says meet my family, my brain doesn't hear warmth. It hears echo. I knew something was weird the second he said he had to step away to take a call. Not weird in a dramatic way, just off, like when someone switches vibes too fast and you feel it even before thinking. We'd been sitting at this low-key outdoor spot, the kind with scratched tables and warm fairy lights hanging across the top, and everything had been normal enough. Awkward jokes, half laughter, we both pretending this wasn't just another random link-up that might disappear into memory. He picked the place, said he liked it because it felt quiet but not dead, which I kinda liked. I arrived thinking it would just be a chill evening, nothing intense, nothing odd. Just another story to tell if my friend asked how the date went. But 10 minutes in, his energy shifted. He glanced at his phone like someone had just triggered a silent alarm and stood up mid-sentence, walking a few paces away, pressing the screen to his ear in that fake call style people do when they don't want to explain anything. I watched him from the corner of my eye, not trying to be obvious but unable to ignore the way his shoulders stiffened. He turned slightly away, head lowered, mouth moving slower now. Not casual, focused. And then I heard the phrase that made my stomach tighten without fully understanding why. The package arriving. Not once, twice, like it mattered, like it was part of something bigger than a random phone update. He didn't look panicked. He didn't rush back to the table either. Just nodded slowly as if confirming timing, confirming details, confirming something he clearly hadn't told me about. When he ended the call, his expression softened too quickly, like a switch flicking back to fake normal. He smiled, returned to the table, carried on chatting as if nothing strange had just flown through the air between us. I tried to follow the conversation, but my head wasn't in it anymore. My eyes kept scanning around the street, the people nearby, the movement around, the shadows at the corner. I couldn't shake the phrase. Maybe it was innocent. Maybe he meant a delivery or something boring, but his tone didn't belong to that kind of context. A few minutes later he stood again, this time saying he needed the toilet but walking straight past the entrance instead. My gaze followed him automatically, and that's when I saw it all unfold in discomforting slow motion. Another man approached from across the pavement. One of those faces you instantly read is not here for small talk. Quick steps, eyes focused, no hesitation. They didn't greet each other like friends. No warmth, just precision. They met by the side wall of the restaurant. I leaned slightly forward, pretending to check my phone while watching them through blurred peripheral view. The exchange happened quicker than expected. Envelope to envelope, hand to hand, smooth like they'd practiced this exact move before. Not cash visible, not smiles, just emotion and separation. My chest started pounding harder now. I didn't know exactly what was happening, but I knew I wasn't meant to be part of it. His eyes flicked around once more before he turned back toward me, trying to slide back into the role of friendly date, as if nothing shady had just gone down. He walked back and picked up his drink, resuming the conversation mid-topic like we hadn't paused, but the unease had swallowed the mood entirely. And then it all cracked. Police cars pulled up suddenly, tires stopping sharp against tarmac, sirens cutting through the ambience like a blade. Blue light flashed across tables, faces, windows. Everything froze. Officers stepped out with intent, heading straight toward the spot by the wall where the exchange took place. The other man tried to walk away but was stopped immediately. Hands raised, movements controlled by command. The entire street went quiet in that way where everyone holds their breath at once. He didn't even try to pretend then. His calm mask slipped as officers approached him next, asking for identification, searching his pockets, searching the envelope he'd barely managed to tuck away. I stood there, half shocked, half detached, watching strangers take control of the situation I'd accidentally been dragged into. They opened one of the envelopes and their postures changed slightly. Not surprised, not confused, like they already knew what this was part of. They questioned him firmly while checking the other man as well. The words package and exchange suddenly made horrible sense. I didn't need the details to understand I was sitting one seat away from something I definitely didn't sign up for. Everyone around started whispering, phones rising, people trying to record the moment without stepping too close. My hands felt cold despite the warm air. Everything that felt casual minutes before now felt contaminated by tension. One of the officers approached me gently, checking if I was okay and then asking basic questions. How long I'd known him, whether I heard anything, whether I'd noticed the exchange. I explained what I'd seen, the call, the phrase, the envelope, the exact moment it changed from date to something else entirely. My voice sounded strangely calm, even though my body felt heavy with adrenaline. He was arrested minutes later, his hands cuffed behind his back, eyes avoiding mine completely. The man he exchanged with was escorted away too. I watched them both disappear into separate vehicles while street noises slowly returned to normal around us. But nothing felt normal anymore. People resumed eating, laughing, checking their phones. The night carried on like the interruption never happened. But I was still sat there trying to process how easily it shifted, how fast a calm evening turned into flashing lights and authority presence. I didn't finish my drink. Didn't feel like touching anything on that table again. I just stood up slowly, thanked the staff for absolutely nothing, and walked away into the night air that suddenly felt too sharp. Back in my live, every message from him felt unreal. His casual tone, his emojis, the fake ease he wrapped around whatever he was actually involved in. It all looked stupid on the screen now. I didn't reply. I didn't lock immediately either. I just let the silence stretch while my brain caught up with what just happened. Maybe I wasn't supposed to overhear that call. Maybe he didn't plan on me noticing the exchange. But I did, and that small detail spared me from sitting through whatever that night could have turned into next. Even now, if someone steps away mid-conversation and lowers their voice into something too careful, my stomach tightens without permission. Not because I'm paranoid, just because I remember the night the street froze and doors shut around a situation I almost ignored. I didn't even care what film we were seeing. That's how chill I thought the night would be. Just a cinema date, dark room, overpriced snacks, maybe a bit awkward but nothing deep. The type of link-up you forget about by next week. She suggested it, said she loved going late when the crowds were thinner, and I agreed because it sounded easy. No pressure. No forced conversation the whole time. Just sit, laugh a little, leave. We met outside the cinema under that bright red sign that always feels way more dramatic than the actual building. She was already there, leaning on the wall scrolling like she'd been bored before I even arrived. When she looked up and smiled, I remember thinking she seemed a bit too restless for someone about to sit through nearly 2 hours of a movie, but I shrugged it off. Inside was standard. The smell of popcorn, sticky floors, loud trailers blasting. We bought our snacks and moved toward the screens. She walked slightly ahead, phone already in her hand, angling it around as if she was capturing the vibe. I assumed it was just social media content. Everyone does that now. It felt normal at first. We found our seats near the back, not right at the top, but close enough that we could stretch out. Lights dimmed slowly and the screen lit up the room. I leaned back, finally relaxing, the day catching up with me. Then she shifted. Not just the usual fidgeting when you're settling into a chair. This was deliberate. She leaned forward, phone raised slightly, camera side pointing toward a row 2 seats down. I noticed the tiny red dot reflecting faintly on her screen as she steadied her grip. My brain paused for a second, but I still tried to convince myself she was taking a snap of the screen or a quick clip for a story. But the angle wasn't right for the movie. It was aimed at people. A couple sat below us, whispering softly, laughing at something on screen. Her phone stayed trained on them for a few seconds too long. Then she tilted slightly and shifted her focus to another group by the aisle. Slow, careful movements, like she was scanning. I glanced at her face, but she wasn't watching the film. She was watching her screen, adjusting exposure, zooming in, tapping, focusing. I leaned back further to see clearer, and the realization hit sharper. She wasn't casually filming. She was deliberately recording strangers without them knowing. My stomach tightened instantly. I whispered her name lightly, hoping she'd stop or at least realize how weird it looked. She gave me a quick hush gesture without even turning fully toward me, like I was interrupting something important. She continued. Lights from the screen flickered across the faces of families, couples, random people just there to have a chill evening. And she was capturing all of it. Faces, reactions, body language, quiet moments. I felt uncomfortable just sitting there while it happened, like I was part of something shady without signing up for it. I tried to pull her attention away from the phone, but her focus didn't break. She angled it again, this time toward someone sitting closer to the front. I leaned in to see what she was actually doing and caught a glimpse of multiple clips saved, each labeled with quick notes and times. It made my chest feel heavy. Not scared yet, just disgusted, unsettled, like crossing a line without realizing how far over you were. I told her clearly this wasn't okay and asked what she thought she was doing. She smirked slightly, brushing it off like it was nothing serious, like she'd been doing this long enough to feel comfortable with it. My instincts screamed louder at that point. I stood up and walked toward the aisle, pretending I needed air. Instead, I headed straight for a staff member near the entrance, explaining in low voice that someone was secretly recording the audience. Their expression sharpened instantly. Security didn't take long. 2 guards stepped in from the side, scanning the back rows quietly, eyes locking onto her phone glowing suspiciously bright compared to everyone else trying to actually watch the film. They approached calmly but firmly, asking her to turn it off and hand it over. She resisted just enough to make the situation obvious. People around started glancing over, whispering, confused. Some annoyed, some uneasy. They checked the device and their posture changed completely when they saw the storage folder loaded with hidden clips, timestamps, faces unaware they'd been captured. They called in additional support, escorting her out carefully while confiscating the phone and other equipment she tucked in her bag. I followed behind, heart still racing, adrenaline buzzing through my limbs. Outside, more officers arrived and started questioning her, then me, then checking her bag thoroughly. That's when the bigger picture surfaced. She'd been selling hidden footage to voyeur sites. Not hobby content, not harmless clips, but actual recordings of unsuspecting people in vulnerable or unaware moments, packaged and uploaded to paying viewers who watched strangers without consent. Ears burned hearing it. I felt sick knowing I'd almost brushed it off as quirky or harmless at first. How casual she'd been about something that violated basic privacy. They pulled more devices from her bag. Cables, mini stands, even small attachments for stabilizing shots in darkness. She planned it with precision, not impulse. The couple she filmed earlier were approached by staff to explain what happened. Their faces shifted from confusion to outrage fast. They just wanted a normal night out, not content for strangers behind screens. She tried to justify it, like the world owed her a platform for attention and cash, like people were just extras in her personal show. But nothing she said softened the seriousness of what she'd done. They escorted her away, still questioning, still removing files from the phone, treating it like evidence instead of a casual device. The glow that once illuminated her face now stared blankly against the dark pavement. I stood there in the cool night air, a cinema sign glowing overhead like nothing strange had happened, while my stomach twisted at how easily something so unsettling could sit beside normality. I didn't go back inside to finish the film. It felt wrong now, like the whole space had been tainted. Walking home, every streetlight felt sharper, every passing face suddenly more real. I kept thinking about how many people were filmed without ever realizing. How many moments were stolen and shared without any permission. This was meant to be a chill night out, some popcorn, some laughs. Instead, it ended reminding me how invisible boundaries get crossed all the time without warning. Later in my live, I sat on my bed staring at the blank wall, replaying the moment I first noticed her phone tilt away from the screen. The slow understanding, the disgust, the strange feeling of being dragged into something wrong by accident. I didn't block her or send messages. I just let the silence sit. Sometimes silence is the only safe thing left after chaos. I shouldn't have trusted the tiny hesitation I felt when he offered to drive. Not the dramatic kind, just that quiet moment where your brain pauses and goes, wait, something about this feels off. But I brushed it aside like I always do, telling myself I was overthinking again. He'd been insisting since the morning, saying it made more sense for him to pick me up, that it was easier, that it would be more comfortable. So I agreed, because saying no felt awkward and I didn't want to look like I was already suspicious before even getting in the car. He arrived earlier than planned and waited outside like he'd been counting down the minutes. Clean car, soft smile, that polite, calm tone that makes you relax a bit too fast. I slid into the passenger seat, and the first thing I noticed was how quiet it felt inside, like the air didn't move properly. He asked if I was comfy, turned the music low, and started driving. The first few minutes were normal. Casual talk, stupid jokes, the usual first date filler. But then the route started changing. He took turns I didn't recognize, drove past streets that would have made more sense, and when I asked where we were heading, he just laughed it off saying he knew a quicker way. Then I heard it. A soft mechanical click. I glanced at the door instinctively and watched the lock indicator flip down. At first I told myself it must have been automatic, that cars do that sometimes. But then I noticed all the doors were locked. Not just mine. All of them. And we weren't even going fast. My heartbeat picked up without permission. I tried to keep casual, lightly testing the handle once, pretending it was nothing. It didn't move. He didn't react. Just kept driving like everything was fine. My phone sat heavy in my hand, and I felt the sudden urge to keep it close, like it was the only thing grounding me to reality. I tried steering the conversation somewhere neutral again, but his answers started shortening. His eyes locked on the road a bit too tight. His jaw clenched slightly like he was concentrating on something that wasn't traffic. He wasn't taking me anywhere familiar. No restaurant, no cafe, no usual meeting place. Just roads that grew quieter the further we went, streetlights thinning, houses spacing out, and that quiet ticking sound from the car engine louder than it should have been. I tried the lock again. Still nothing. This time he glanced over briefly, smile flickering in a way that didn't feel friendly anymore. Like he noticed my discomfort but chose not to address it. And that's when real panic started to creep in, slow and heavy. I slid my phone lower and opened my messages, typing fast but trying not to look obvious. I sent my friend my live location with a short message saying I felt weird about the situation. Not dramatic, just real. Then I typed a second follow-up asking her to stay aware if I stopped replying. The car kept moving. Longer stretches without people, the air thicker. My fingers tightened around the phone like it might disappear if I didn't hold it firmly enough. He suddenly took a narrow turn onto a side road that felt completely wrong. Darker, emptier, the type of road you don't casually drive down unless you have a reason. He didn't explain, didn't soften it with humor, just did it. I glanced back using the side mirror reflexively like I could spot help somewhere behind us. Nothing. Just fading headlights and shadows swallowing the road. Then my phone vibrated. My friend replied fast, already worried, asking if I was okay. I didn't answer right away. Instead, I kept sharing my location, making sure it stayed on. Every few seconds felt painfully long. He slowed suddenly, drifting toward the side of the road for a moment before pulling off again. Not stopping, just recalculating something in his head, and that's when the sirens started screaming through the silence. Blue lights flooded the space around us, bouncing off the inside of the car. His jaw tightened instantly, shoulders stiff, posture changing from calm to trapped. He braked hard, tires squealing. The car jerked slightly, and I felt my whole body tense as multiple police cars boxed him in from front and back. Doors opening, boots hitting the asphalt, voices commanding him to switch off the engine and keep his hands visible. My door remained locked until one of the officers pulled it open from the outside, guiding me out gently but quickly, checking me over with concerned eyes. The relief hit like a wave, but the adrenaline hadn't faded yet. They dragged him out next, firm but controlled, questioning him straight away. His story fell apart fast. Excuses layered over each other, none of them matching the route he'd chosen or why he'd locked the doors mid-drive. My friend appeared a few minutes later, shaken but relieved, hugging me tightly like I'd just stepped out of something much worse than I wanted to think about. The police explained they intercepted the car after receiving unusual GPS movement and mobilized response based on my shared location and warnings issued through my friend's report. What couldn't turn darker got cut short because of a message I almost didn't send. He was arrested on the spot for attempted abduction. No hesitation. No room for charm or excuses to smooth things over. Standing there on the side of the road, watching the car I'd been locked inside get searched felt surreal. This was supposed to be a normal link-up. Some awkward conversation. Maybe a handshake goodbye. Instead, it almost ended with me somewhere I never intended to be. I didn't cry. Didn't ask for details. I just stood there breathing slowly, letting the chaos untangle itself from my chest. Later, back in my live, I stared at my phone in silence for a long time, thinking about how fast an ordinary decision can turn. How easy it is to brush off instinct. How loud it becomes when it's finally proven right. I still replay that moment sometimes, the click of the lock, the way the world went quiet, the way everything changed with one choice I nearly ignored. I didn't expect your place to feel so quiet. Not peaceful quiet, more like the air didn't quite move properly. The kind of silence that makes you suddenly aware of your own breathing. She'd invited me over after a few decent chats and a casual dinner, saying it would be easier to hang out somewhere comfortable instead of wandering around aimlessly. I agreed because nothing about her felt intense at first. Just slightly quirky, slightly mysterious, the normal sort of unpredictability people call personality now. Her flat looked normal enough. Bookshelf against the wall, fairy lights loosely draped, mismatched cushions, the usual aesthetic that looks curated but still chilled. She gave me a quick tour and I tried to relax, telling myself I wasn't about to step into anything strange. We sat on the sofa, watched random clips, joked about weird internet trends, the typical stuff you do when you're still figuring someone out. I noticed she kept glancing towards the bookshelf more than necessary. Not enough to fully alarm me, just enough for my brain to flag it quietly. She'd slightly positioned herself to face it better. Even when it made sitting awkward, I tried to ignore it. After a while, I stood up and wandered aimlessly, pretending to look at her books like I was interested. I wasn't. I just needed to stretch, and there was something drawing my attention that I couldn't name yet. I leaned in closer and noticed a small gap between two books where something glossy reflected faint light. Not a cover. Not plastic wrap. Something else. I narrowed my eyes and tilted my head slightly. That's when it clicked. A lens. Small, almost cleverly hidden, slipped discreetly between titles, pointing directly towards the couch. My stomach dropped so hard I forgot how to breathe for a second. The realization swallowed me whole. I wasn't just sat there chilling. I was sitting in her frame. I stepped back slowly, my heart thudding awkwardly hard against my ribs. The living room suddenly felt smaller, tighter. Every movement now felt exposed. I glanced at her, and she froze for just a second before masking it with a laugh that didn't feel natural at all. I pointed towards the shelf, asking what that was, trying to keep my voice steady even though everything inside me was screaming. Her expression shifted from casual to defensive in half a breath. Not surprised. Not shocked, I noticed. Just annoyed it had been spotted. She hesitated, then shrugged it off like it was no big deal, brushing her explanation with some half-humor that didn't land. She admitted it wasn't private for just her, that she films dates, that there's some underground review site where people pay to watch first impressions, reactions, body language, awkward moments, genuine moments. Like dates are episodes and humans are entertainment. Not something casual. Not something innocent. A private network of strangers watching moments I never agreed to share. My chest felt tight and heavy, like I'd been tricked into a performance without consent. I'd been sitting there laughing, opening up slightly, thinking it was just between us while cameras recorded from a hidden angle. I felt stunned. Not even angry yet. Just disgusted and unsettled that someone could treat real people like content for some twisted curated platform. The idea that others could be watching my expressions, analyzing me without my knowledge, made my skin crawl. I asked how long it had been recording, and she avoided the answer. That told me enough. I didn't shout. Didn't make a scene. I just quietly pulled out my phone and told her I was contacting authorities. Her whole vibe shifted then, suddenly serious, suddenly trying to explain herself, downplay it, justify it as some weird modern adult rating system that people supposedly consent to. But I hadn't, and I was the only one clearly. Within minutes, the sound of sirens echoed through the street below. Her face drained of that forced calm completely. The performance was ending, and she knew it. Officers stepped inside, scanning the space. My heart still racing while I explained everything, pointing towards the shelf where the hidden camera sat. They moved in quickly, switching it off, checking wiring, noticing more tucked away behind plants, between decorations, even angled by the doorway. Turns out the bookshelf wasn't the only property spying on guests. The living room that once looked cute suddenly felt like a surveillance zone. Every corner potentially recording every visit, every conversation, every reaction. They questioned her while pulling cables, equipment, storage drives from drawers and cupboards. Their faces remained serious, like this wasn't the first time they'd handled something like this, but it was far from common. They examined the devices, checking what had been saved, how many people had been uploaded, how accessible the site was. Her headset of excuses barely held together as reality closed in on her. The network was larger than just a harmless hobby. It was a structured space where people paid for voyeurism, completely detached from real-world boundaries. She wasn't some innocent bored girl. She was part of a deliberate system exploiting unsuspecting visitors for content. I sat on the edge of her sofa watching strangers sort through equipment that once watched me. I kept replaying fragments of the evening in my mind. My laugh, my awkward pauses, the way I shifted my hands, all of it possibly already seen by eyes I never authorized. The officers escorted her out while still questioning, leaving the flat eerily stripped of anything that felt normal. Wires coiled on the floor. Lights flicking off and on while presets were disabled. That soft, fake warmth gone completely. Once everything settled, they reassured me that my footage wouldn't be released further and that legal action would follow. But reassurance didn't erase the disturbing reality that my privacy had been silently stolen on what I thought was just a normal night. The walk home felt surreal. Every window looked brighter. Every shadow looked deeper. I found myself hyper-aware of spaces, corners, reflections, imagining hidden devices where none existed. The mental residue lingered. Later, back in my live, I scanned my environment more than usual, double-checking shelves, drawers, corners. I didn't even notice when I finally sat down and exhaled properly. My phone buzzed with the last message she'd sent before everything unfolded, still sitting there like it belonged to a normal situation instead of the mess it became. I didn't respond. I just deleted it and let the silence take over. For the first time in a long while, I felt like the digital world and the real world had collided in the worst possible way, where trust gets monetized and vulnerability becomes entertainment. Even now, weeks later, I still catch myself glancing at bookshelves with suspicion. I already felt off before I even got to the park, like when your stomach knows something you haven't figured out yet. I remember standing by the entrance gate, watching joggers go past and kids chasing each other, and thinking this was meant to feel calm. Fresh air. Simple walk. Normal first meet energy. He'd suggested it with that casual tone that makes it sound harmless, like nothing could possibly go wrong under trees and open sky. He showed up 10 minutes late, acting laid back about it, smiling like he hadn't kept me waiting on purpose. Tall, quiet, hoodie pulled halfway over his head, even though the weather didn't need it. He gave this friendly nod instead of proper eye contact, which already felt a bit strange, but I brushed it off because everyone has their awkward first date style. We started walking along the main path, the one that curves around the pond, and he barely asked me anything. Just kept looking ahead or slightly to the side. I tried filling the silence with random talk, joking about ducks, badly pretending I wasn't clocking how distracted he was. He laughed occasionally, but his focus wasn't fully on me. It kept drifting somewhere behind my shoulder. At first I thought he was just shy, maybe juggling nerves. But then I noticed he kept slowing down and then speeding up, almost like he was matching someone else's pace, not mine. Every time I stopped, he would pause too, but his eyes kept tracking the same figure further ahead. A woman. She was walking alone with a tote bag slung over her shoulder, headphones in, clueless to the fact she was being watched. He kept timing his steps with hers, like an invisible string pulled him forward. The more I noticed it, the more my chest tightened. I tried subtly steering the conversation back to us, asking questions, nudging the vibe, but he barely responded properly. His eyes flicked to her again and again, calculating, distant, like I was the background instead of his actual date. I slowed down on purpose and he slowed too, but his attention didn't drop from her. Then I sped up and he sped up. Not to stay by me, but to keep distance lined up with her movements instead. That's when the real unease hit. We rounded a corner near some benches, and she stopped briefly to pull something from her bag. He shifted instantly, stepping slightly behind her footsteps like he knew exactly what moment he'd been waiting for. My instinct screamed that this wasn't coincidental. I pretended I'd dropped something and paused, watching his body language change. His hand dipped into his pocket carefully, fingers closing around something small and dark. Not a phone. Not keys. Something flatter. More precise. He started closing the gap. I didn't even think. I stepped forward fast and called out to the woman with my heart pounding out of control, waving slightly so she'd look back. She turned, confused, eyes moving between me and him, the tension suddenly visible. He froze for a split second, then tried to smile like nothing was happening, like he was just nearby for a reason that made sense. But it didn't. Not the way he stood. Not the way his hand stayed clenched in his pocket. I walked straight to her and gestured awkwardly toward him, explaining that he'd been following instead of walking with me. Her expression shifted from confusion to real concern in seconds. She stepped back slightly, still staring at his hand. He stepped forward pretending to act calm, but she instinctively pulled her bag closer. That's when his fingers slipped out, holding something narrow and metallic, like a small tracking device disguised to look harmless. He tried to move fast, reaching for the strap of her bag as if he was adjusting it for her, but she swerved and I grabbed his wrist instinctively, shocked by my own reaction but knowing I had to stop it. His mask dropped for half a second, just long enough to show he hadn't planned on being caught. His eyes darted around, scanning the park as if hoping no one else had noticed. But they had. People nearby started murmuring. Phones raised. Someone shouted. A security guard from the nearby entrance area started hurrying over. The atmosphere shifted instantly from peaceful morning park energy into tense, curly silence. The guard approached, eyes locking onto the device in his hand, then onto the woman's shaken expression. He tried to downplay it, shrugging, muttering excuses that didn't line up with his movements or the fact he'd stopped mid-act. It was messy, obvious, badly covered. The police arrived quicker than I expected, like they'd dealt with things like this before. They separated us without any hesitation, taking the device, asking both of us to explain what had just happened. I spoke as clearly as I could, even though my voice was still shaking slightly, explaining the way he'd been tracking her and ignoring me. They checked his pockets. More of the same devices, smaller ones, hidden, labeled. The realization made my stomach sink even deeper. This wasn't a one-off weird moment. It was a routine. The woman stood beside me, shaken but thankful, telling them she had no idea he'd been watching her until I spoke up. Her hands trembled slightly as she clutched her bag closer, like safety suddenly felt fragile. He finally confessed indirectly when they started going through his phone, finding saved photos, map pins, locations, routes he followed on different days. Multiple women, different areas, same pattern, same chilling consistency. I stood there realizing I hadn't even been his focus. I was noise, cover, a distraction so he could play quiet observer without looking suspicious. Being his date made him look normal while he lined up another target. They led him away in cuffs, his shoulders no longer relaxed, his calm persona cracking under the sheer awkward reality of being exposed in public. People whispered, some stared, others walked off unsettled by what they'd witnessed. The woman beside me kept thanking me under her breath, still trying to steady herself, still confused how something that dangerous could happen in the middle of a busy park with families nearby. When everything settled and the crowd thinned, I realized I was standing there emotionally drained, heart still thudding faster than it should, replaying the moment he tried to slip that tracker onto her bag. The intent, the planning, the quiet confidence before it fell apart. Walking back through the same path we'd taken earlier, the air felt oddly heavier, like the park itself had shifted tone. Birds still chirped, kids still laughed, but my sense of safety had taken a sharp dent. I kept thinking about how easily that could have continued if I'd ignored the vibe. How many other people he trailed without being caught? How many walked away never knowing how close they were to being monitored or followed by someone they didn't even know existed? Later that evening, sitting in my live, I replayed the whole thing again and again, realizing how instinct saved that moment. Not logic, not bravery, just the internal alarm that refused to stay quiet. It still felt surreal that a simple park date turned into exposing someone's predatory routine. The thought stayed with me long after the adrenaline wore off. I thought I was finally getting one calm, normal night, the kind where nothing strange happens and you just laugh, eat bad pasta, and go home slightly disappointed but still okay with life. I even remember checking my outfit twice and thinking maybe I was overdoing it for a simple restaurant date. She picked the place, said she loved the vibe there, said it was cozy and locky. I didn't question it. I just showed up. The restaurant was warm and busy, that soft hum of voices mixed with cutlery clinking and waiters weaving between tables like a smooth routine. She was already there, sat by the corner, scrolling on her phone like she'd been bored waiting for me, but still smiled when I approached. Not a fake smile, just casual, like someone trying to keep things relaxed. We ordered food, talked about random things, new me stress, what shows we've been watching, who's annoying at work, basic chill conversation that didn't feel forced. At first, it was genuinely fine. I started thinking maybe this one would just be normal and forgettable in the healthiest way possible. Then I noticed something small that my brain didn't like. While I was mid-sentence, she leaned forward and reached down, placing her bag beside her chair. I didn't think much of it until she shifted slightly and I saw her hand move under the table. Slow, careful, deliberate, not like someone adjusting their seat or grabbing a dropped napkin. More like she was trying to hide something behind one of the table legs. My eyes flicked down without being obvious. I couldn't fully see what she'd done, just that something darker now sat under the edge of our table, half hidden by the chair in shadow. She returned her hand casually and continued talking as if nothing unusual had just happened. I told myself it had to be nothing. Maybe she dropped her phone. Maybe it was her charger. Maybe I was just overthinking. But the gut feeling wasn't settling. It was sitting heavy and uneasy right under my ribs. I leaned back slightly and tried to get a better look, pretending to stretch, and that's when I caught a glimpse of something solid and unfamiliar tucked too neatly under the table to belong there by accident. Not her bag. Not coat. Something small but firm, resting precisely where our legs had been moments earlier. She noticed me looking, and her expression tightened for half a second before smoothing out again. She asked if I was okay, acting gentle, almost too calm. I nodded and tried to keep the mood light, but the tension had already seeped into the air. A few minutes passed, and I started noticing subtle reactions from other tables. A waiter slowing down. A staff member pausing near the counter looking toward our section. Whispers growing slightly louder than normal. One woman a few tables away looked confused, then unsettled. Then everything flipped. A staff member hurried over, crouched near our table, eyes widening when they spotted what was underneath. Their posture shifted instantly, no hesitation, no confusion, just a sharp movement that told everyone nearby something wasn't right. They signaled to another worker quickly, whispering words I couldn't fully catch, but the tone was everything. The atmosphere changed in seconds. People started being quietly guided away from the area, chairs scraping, hushed voices. Nervous looks. The manager appeared, focused, tense. Every staff movement was controlled, but urgent. She stayed unbelievably calm, didn't question it, didn't react. Just looked straight ahead like this wasn't unfolding around her. That calm somehow scared me more than the panic spreading through the room. Then I heard the word suspicious. I didn't need anything else to connect the dots. Police arrived not long after, clearing the immediate area, keeping people away, guiding diners outside into the cold evening air. Nobody was screaming, but the fear was obvious. Phones raised. Murmurs everywhere. Confusion heavy like thick fog. We were told to stand further back while officers examined what had been left. My eyes locked onto her now, searching for any sign of panic or guilt, but she barely moved. Not once did she try to explain. Not once did she look shocked at something dangerous was now in the center of attention. And then the bomb squad arrived. Even seeing that felt unreal. The protective suits, the careful steps, the hushed coordination. Like watching a scene happen in real life that normally only stays on the news. People around me stood frozen, some crying quietly, others just staring blankly. She was escorted aside, questioned, separated from me without resistance. I wanted to ask what she'd done. I wanted to know why someone I barely knew would place something like that under a table without blinking. But her silence said enough. Officers spoke to me next, asking what I'd seen when I saw it, how she moved, if I noticed anything unusual. I explained everything as clearly as I could, her hand, the positioning, how casual she made it look, how none of it made sense in the moment. Behind the barriers, the restaurant now looked like a completely different place. Not warm anymore. Not social. Just tense and unsafe. After what felt like forever, they announced that the device had been secured and posed no further threat. I could finally breathe properly again, but the adrenaline was still flooding through my system. The relief felt shallow. She was handcuffed shortly after, led away while officers discussed charges connected to placing a suspicious package in a public venue. She didn't shout, didn't argue, just walked with them like someone who already knew where this night was heading long before I did. People started dispersing slowly, still shaken, still replaying the chaos in their heads. I stood there watching the flashing lights fade, wondering how I went from awkward small talk to bomb squad presence within the same hour. Later, walking home alone, the silence felt different. Heavier, more aware, like the world had briefly opened a window into how unpredictable dating strangers can turn. I kept thinking about how calm she was, how precise the movement looked, how she never once tried to defend herself. That still sat with me more than the chaos itself. Back in my live, I sat on my bed staring at my phone, the messages from earlier in the night now feeling eerie instead of playful. The compliments, the emojis, the plan. Every line now layered with something darker underneath. Nothing actually exploded. Nobody got hurt. But the fear of what could have happened stayed long after the sirens died down. I swear the only reason I even slept over it was because I convinced myself that overnight stays make things feel more real. Like you wake up next to someone and everything still feels fine, and maybe it isn't just a date anymore. He seemed normal, soft-spoken, slightly quiet, the type who laughs under his breath instead of out loud, not intense, not overly charming, just average enough to trust. His place didn't scream danger. Small, tidy, faint smell of fabric softener, nothing dramatic. We watched random clips on his laptop for a while, talked about dumb memories from school, compared playlists, the usual date filler stuff. When it got late and he said I could crash there instead of making the long journey home, I didn't hesitate much. I just nodded like it was nothing. I curled up under the spare blanket while he sat on the edge of the bed scrolling through his phone. I remember half joking that he never actually sleeps, and he laughed it off. Lights eventually went dim, the room quiet, the kind of silence that lets you drift off without trying. I don't know how long I've been asleep before the sound pulled me back awake. Faint clicking. Consistent. Like fingers moving quickly over keys. Not tapping on a phone screen. More deliberate than that. Actual typing. I opened my eyes slightly, still pretending to be asleep, and saw a soft glow across the room. He was sitting at his desk. His back to me. Shoulders hunched forward. Fully awake. Focused. The only light came from his monitor, casting a pale glow around his face and hands. I stayed still at first, trying to figure out why he'd be working this late, but the second my eyes adjusted, the chilling detail hit. On the screen was my face. Not a normal photo, not a cute selfie preview. My face, taken from earlier in the night, layered and edited into something that clearly wasn't real. Something that made my stomach twist hard. I felt sick just seeing the early stages of what he was doing, dragging sliders, copying parts, framing shapes that weren't mine, weren't real, weren't something I had ever agreed to. He wasn't just scrolling, he was shaping. Sculpting something fake and humiliating with my image like it was nothing more than a digital toy. Panic rose up fast, but I forced myself to stay still. Every part of me wanted to sit up and ask what the hell he thought he was doing, but instinct told me to not alert him yet. Not when he didn't know I'd seen it. I shifted my hands slowly under the blanket and slid my phone closer without making a sound. My heart was racing loud enough I thought he'd hear it. I angled the camera just slightly, pressing record, capturing his silhouette, the screen, the proof of what he was building. He didn't stop, didn't hesitate, just kept working, zooming in, changing things, layering more detail, saving files, renaming them like this was a normal part of his nightly routine, like I was one of many. Every second felt heavier, longer, like time slowed just to make it hurt more. My face on the screen no longer looked like me. It looked like a stranger's version of me, twisted and altered into something set up for exploitation. My body felt frozen under the blanket while fear and disbelief collided in my chest. I held the phone steady as long as I could, capturing everything clearly enough for it to count. Then I ended the recording carefully, still not moving. A few minutes later, he finally closed the software and turned the light off, slipping back into bed like nothing had happened. I kept my breathing steady, pretending I was still asleep while my mind spun wildly trying to process what I just witnessed. When his breathing fell into sleep rhythm, I slowly rolled away and checked the video. Clear, undeniable, him editing, him creating something that could ruin me if it ever left that laptop. I didn't waste time confronting him. I stepped out quietly, grabbed my jacket, slipped into the hallway, and locked myself in the bathroom. Shaky fingers but clear head, I attached the video and contacted the police, explaining everything in the most direct way I could before fear changed my mind. They told me to stay where I was and remain safe. I pressed my ear against the door, listening to the faint hum of his laptop fan, then his slow footsteps as he moved around, clearly unaware of what was about to happen. The knock on the door was sharp, loud, final. He opened it confused, sleepy, voice thick with fake innocence as officers stepped inside. They moved fast, straight towards his desk, seizing the laptop, scrolling through files, matching it with the proof I'd sent. His posture dropped instantly, like the curtain had been pulled without warning. He tried to explain, but nothing stuck. The software was still open, the files still saved. My photo still sitting there mid-edit for all of them to see. They arrested him on the spot for digital exploitation, taking his devices, questioning him while I stood there in the doorway, feeling like my entire body had gone numb. Not just scared, violated in a way that felt silent but deep. They asked me if there were more photos, more files. I didn't even know yet. I didn't want to imagine it. But what I'd seen was already enough to make it clear this wasn't a one-time mistake. This was a system, a habit, something rehearsed. As they led him away, he avoided looking at me completely, like my eyes reminded him of his own wrong choices. The flat felt hollow once the door shut behind them, quiet thicker than the night before. I sat on the edge of the bed staring at the now blank desk where my image had been warped just minutes earlier. The duvet still warm, the pillow still indented by his head, the space now left behind by someone who never deserved to feel close to anyone. Later on, back in my live, I replayed the video once more before deleting it from my phone, not to punish myself, but to remind myself what I stopped before it could spread, before it could grow teeth and harm. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just sat there breathing slowly until the world started to feel real again. I don't know why I thought a picnic date would feel cute instead of awkward, but in my head it made sense at the time. Sunshine, snacks, easy vibes, nothing too intense. She suggested it first, which felt refreshing, like she actually put thought into something instead of just saying let's grab a drink and calling it a day. I remember thinking this might be one of those rare, genuinely chill meetups that doesn't end with both people pretending they're busy for the rest of the week. We picked a big park just outside the center, the type with long fields and random families walking dogs way too big for their owners. I arrived early with a small bag, nothing fancy, just enough to not look like I didn't care. She turned up a few minutes later, smiling big, sunglasses slightly crooked, acting super friendly like we'd known each other longer than just some texts and snaps. We laid out the blanket and started unpacking random food. Everything seemed normal at first. Casual chat, laughing at silly stuff, pointing out weird people nearby, the usual filler that makes the silence feel less heavy. I felt relaxed. Too relaxed. I didn't see the shift when it started happening. At some point, I leaned back on my elbows and set my wallet and keys to the side of the blanket, just within reach. She moved closer than before, reaching for her phone, pretending to adjust the angle for a photo of the Sev. I thought she was just being that social media type who has to document everything. But the way her phone hovered felt off. Too focused. Too slow. Not aimed at the snacks or the view or even us. Aimed lower. Aimed exactly where my stuff was lying. I tried to pretend I didn't notice, but my eyes didn't leave the screen. Her thumb tapped like she was zooming in, then angled slightly, then snapped again. I shifted my leg and she adjusted the phone again instantly to keep the same frame. That's when my stomach tightened. I knew I wasn't imagining it. She wasn't taking cute picnic photos. She was documenting my wallet and keys like they were a product. I sat up, pretending to stretch, and casually moved my things closer to me. She smiled like nothing strange happened, and kept chatting like she'd just done nothing unusual. But my guard was up now. I watched every little move differently. A few minutes later, she asked if we could swap seats so she could get better light for selfies. It sounded harmless, but something in my head rang louder. I declined casually and tried to steer the vibe back into normal territory, but she kept glancing around too much, like she was checking for someone. Then the moment cracked. I watched her lean back slightly and send a quick message without trying to hide it. The type of message that's too fast and specific, like code. I stared past her and noticed two guys by the tree line who definitely weren't there earlier. Pretending to scroll. Pretending not to watch us. But watching. Before I could even process the situation fully, one of them started walking over, the other following just behind him. Her expression didn't change. Still light. Still friendly. Still fake. My chest started to tighten, but I kept my voice calm, challenging her about the photos. Her tone shifted instantly. Not defensive, not apologetic. Just annoyed like I'd interfered with something planned. The guys reached the edge of the blanket and stood uncomfortably close. Too close for strangers. Their body language wasn't friendly. Not casual. They looked straight at me like I was already part of a problem. One of them reached down under the excuse of picking something up, and that's when instinct fully took over. I pulled back fast and stood up, confusion and tension colliding in one sharp second. Then they lunged. Not dramatic, but forceful enough to send adrenaline straight through my chest. Hands grabbing for me. One of them reaching for my side where my phone was. The other closing space. People nearby started noticing. Murmurs rising, sudden movement breaking the relaxed park vibe. Before anything turned uglier, sirens cut through the air sharp and sudden. Blue lights flashing through the trees. Everyone froze. The two guys hesitated just long enough for uniformed officers to rush in, grabbing them back, ordering them to step away. She stayed seated like it was all part of some everyday routine, like this wasn't a public scene turning messy around her. The officers separated us quickly, asking me what happened while restraining the men and questioning her straight away. She tried to play innocent, but her story didn't align with theirs and definitely didn't align with the evidence they were already pulling up. Turns out this wasn't some random moment. They'd been monitoring a small pickpocket ring operating through dating apps. She'd been the friendly face, the bait, arranging casual meetups, identifying valuables, sending angles and details to the guys who would then swoop in to steal or pressure. My wallet and keys weren't just accessories to her. They were targets. One officer showed me screenshots from her phone. Images of my belongings. Zoomed in. Labeled. Tagged. Along with several other photos of various guys taken in similar outdoor setups. Same blanket pose. Same angle. Different faces. Same method. That's when the full weight of it kicked in. I wasn't unlucky. I was part of a pattern. Sequence. Playbook. They cuffed her as naturally as you'd see someone pay for a bus ticket. No drama. No tears. Just the performance ending where it always does. The guys were led away too, still defending themselves in messy half-sentences that made no sense to anyone around. I stood there surrounded by police tape and curious onlookers, trying to reassemble how a Sunday picnic turned into something out of a crime documentary. I replayed every moment, every smile, every shift, every cute suggestion that wasn't actually cute at all. People nearby moved on quickly once it settled, returning to their jogs and dog walks like nothing major happened. But my head felt heavy, like it took time to adjust back into reality. The officers gave me a summary of what they uncovered, how long it had been going on, how many people were caught off guard, how her profile had been reported multiple times, but always reappeared under a slightly different username. After they left, the park felt weirdly silent, even with people around. I folded the blanket with hands that still felt slightly tense, packed up the rest of the food that no longer felt edible, and took one last look at the spot before walking away. Same grass, same sky, different meaning now. Later that night, back in my live, I stared at my keys and wallet sitting safely on my desk and felt a strange mix of relief and anger. Not dramatic, just real. Like the realization that someone you thought was harmless was never meant to be harmless in the first place. I almost didn't go. That's the funniest part. My phone was on 5%. My hair was doing that annoying flat at the back thing, and the idea of small talk over coffee felt long for no reason. But I already said yes, and he seemed normal online, like painfully normal, the boring, safe kind you don't expect anything weird from. So I threw on a hoodie, grabbed my keys, and convinced myself fresh air was better than lying in bed scrolling for hours. The cafe was one of those independent spots squeezed between a charity shop and a convenience store, soft music playing, mismatched chairs, chalkboard menu that tried too hard to look cool. I arrived a few minutes early and stood outside, mindlessly checking my phone, trying to spot him from his profile pic. And that's when I saw it. A poster taped to the brick wall beside the entrance. Missing. Grainy photo, slightly older version, but the eyes were the same, the shape of the mouth, the faint scar above the eyebrow. My stomach dropped, but I stepped closer anyway, pretending I just wanted to read it properly. The name on the poster didn't match the name I knew him by. That alone should have been the end of it, but curiosity got ugly real quick. I kept staring until there was no way I could deny the resemblance. Age progress type look. Same face. Slightly altered, but not enough to fool someone standing inches away. The text underneath talked about disappearing suddenly, no contact, family concerned. I felt like I was breathing thinner air. Then I turned slightly and saw him walking towards me, smiling like he'd done nothing wrong in his entire life. Same face as the poster, same eyes, same everything. Just more polished, more alive, but the missing version never existed. I didn't react, didn't show it on my face. I just stepped back and nodded casually as if I'd seen nothing. We went inside, ordered coffee, sat down like everything was normal. My mind was racing, but my body stayed calm, almost too calm. I kept thinking maybe I was wrong. Maybe the photo was outdated. Maybe it just looked like him. Maybe I was overthinking it. But every small detail made the paranoia stronger. The way he avoided certain questions. The way he brushed past simple things like where he worked or where he lived. The way he spoke vaguely about his past like he rehearsed it. Nothing specific. Nothing solid. Just blur. While he talked about random things, I pretended to check my phone and search the name from the poster. Local articles popped up. Timelines. Photos. Same face over different years under different names. Every scroll made my skin feel tighter. It wasn't just him. It was multiple names attached to similar photos. Different addresses. Different cities. Like he was shifting identities as casually as people change trainers. I swallowed hard and excused myself to the bathroom, trying to keep my steps steady. Once inside, I stood by the sink gripping the edge, staring at my own reflection, trying to process what I'd just uncovered. I didn't confront him. I didn't panic. I just trusted the instinct that screamed something was off and went straight for the cafe staff. I discreetly explained what I'd seen and asked them to call the police quietly, not making a scene, not letting him know yet. They watched him through the counter area, glanced at the poster outside, then nodded, taking it more seriously than I expected. I returned to the table acting normal again, heart slamming so hard it felt visible. He carried on chatting like he had no idea his mask was about to crack. Sipping his drink, scrolling his phone, laughing lightly at things that weren't even funny. I watched the way he moved now with sharper eyes, picking up on tiny habits, tiny inconsistencies, like my brain finally switched into alert mode. The police came faster than I thought they would. Plain clothes, quiet movement, eyes scanning. They approached us calmly, asking him to stand up. His posture shifted instantly. Subtle tension. Casual confidence flickering for a moment before he smoothed out again like it meant nothing. They asked for identification. He handed over a card without hesitation. They checked it, then checked him, then asked more questions. Names started not matching. Databases popped up. His face tightened slightly, but he still didn't look surprised, just careful. And then the truth rolled out in pieces. Multiple fake identities, dozens, different names, different backstories, some semi-legal, some completely made up. He'd been moving through towns for years under different profiles, different apps, different covers. Not just hiding, rewriting himself constantly. I sat there stunned while they explained that he had been declared missing years ago, under one identity he'd erased himself from, leaving a whole network of people thinking he vanished. No goodbye. No trace. Just gone. But he wasn't gone. He was sitting across from me holding a paper cup, acting like everything was fine. They escorted him outside slowly, checking messages on his phone, flipping through details of his fabricated life. Meanwhile, people in the cafe just stared, trying to figure out what was happening without anyone saying it out loud. His expression finally dropped as they let him past the same poster he walked past earlier like it didn't belong to him. I watched through the window as they spoke to him firm and focused, piecing together what he'd built around himself. Years of pretending, years of false names, years of becoming whoever suited the moment. My body felt hollow standing there knowing I'd almost treated that as just another coffee date, another forgettable hour. Instead, it turned into watching a man unravel under his own lies. Once everything calmed down, the cafe staff asked if I was okay. I nodded automatically, even though my hands still trembled slightly. I sat back down alone, staring at the empty seat across from me, wondering how many other people he fooled before me. How many others sat with him thinking he was just some normal guy killing time on a dating app. Eventually, I paid for my untouched drink and stepped back outside, eyes drawn back to the missing poster fluttering slightly in the breeze. It had been there the whole time. Warning in plain sight, waiting for someone to connect the dots. Walking away felt strange. Not relief. Not fear. Just a heavy awareness that the world isn't as predictable as you want it to be. That sometimes the person smiling across from you isn't just hiding thoughts. They're hiding entire lifetimes. I still remember how casual I felt walking up the chipped concrete steps to her block that night, like I was just heading to a normal link-up and not about to walk into something that'd mess with my head for ages. She'd invited me over after a week of talking. Nothing intense, just those back and forth messages where you start thinking you kind of get the vibe of someone. She seemed playful, slightly odd in a harmless way, the sort of girl who laughs at things that aren't that funny and uses way too many emojis. I thought it would be chill. Sit on the sofa, scroll through playlists, maybe watch something pointless and half fall asleep. Her flat was on the third floor and the hallway smelled faintly damp, like it never fully dried after the last time it rained. When she opened the door, she seemed same as always. Barefoot, oversized hoodie, messy hair like she didn't overthink her appearance. She smiled wide, stepped back, let me walk in like it was normal. That's what made it stranger later. How normal everything seemed before it wasn't. Inside looked tidy but slightly off, like someone had tidied quickly before guests arrived. Cushions placed too carefully. Table wiped down but still streaky. The type of clean that's rushed, not natural. I sat on the sofa while she grabbed drinks from the kitchen, talking about random stuff. Her neighbors, how the lift always broke, how she hated the smell of her building. I laughed along, trying not to overanalyze anything. About 15 minutes in, I noticed a faint sound that didn't match the tea. Soft movement. Not footsteps exactly, more like fabric shifting against something. I paused mid-scroll and listened. It stopped. I tried to ignore it because nobody wants to be the paranoid one over nothing. But it happened again, slightly louder this time. A low thump and a dragging sound. I glanced at her. She was still smiling, sipping her drink like nothing was wrong. I asked casually if she had pets. She laughed and shook her head, wide grin, eyes a little too fixed. I told myself it was pipes. Dodgy building, weird neighbors, anything that my brain was hinting at. The sound came again, closer this time, like it was coming from down the narrow hallway near the spare room. The door was slightly ajar. She noticed me looking and quickly shifted in her seat, crossing her legs, suddenly more talkative than before. That's when the uncomfortable edge crept in. I stood up pretending I needed the bathroom, but my instincts pulled me towards that door instead. The closer I walked, the more my heart hammered. Not loud, just quick, uneasy. I reached the door and hesitated for a second, almost hoping the sound would stop so I wouldn't have to find out. But it didn't stop. I pushed the door slowly and the sight hit me so hard I felt dizzy instantly. Another guy lay on the floor, hands tied behind him, ankles secured, eyes wide and exhausted. His mouth wasn't fully covered, but he was clearly struggling, breathing uneven, face pale like he'd been there longer than he should have. His eyes met mine and the panic in them said everything. My body froze. Not dramatic, just stuck, like my brain needed extra time to understand what it was seeing. This wasn't shock content. This was real. Someone tied up in her spare room in the middle of what I thought was a normal evening. I stepped back slowly, heartbeat pounding so loud it drowned everything else. She appeared behind me before I even turned, leaning against the wall, still with that soft smile plastered on her face. She tried to brush it off, making light of it, like this was some dark humor thing that would magically make sense. But nothing about it felt like a joke. Not his face. Not the tension in his limbs. Not the way the room smelled faintly stale and barely ventilated. I knew this wasn't something you laugh at or ignore. This was dangerous in a quiet, horrifying way. Then the sirens outside started. Sharp, sudden, filling the street below, loud enough to vibrate through the windows. Her expression shifted instantly. The playful energy dropped like it had never existed. She moved fast now, too fast, trying to grab her bag, reaching for her phone, glancing around like escape was still an option. Heavy banging echoed through the front door moments later, followed by voices demanding entry. I backed away instinctively, hands raised slightly without thinking, my whole body buzzing with fear and disbelief. Officers flooded in, controlled but urgent, scanning every room before locking eyes on the spare room situation. They moved towards her immediately, gripping her arms, restraining her while another group rushed to free the guy on the floor. The way he collapsed when the ropes loosened said this wasn't something playful or staged. He'd been there a while. Too long. My mind was racing, replaying every moment since I stepped through that door, wondering how easily I'd been brought into her space without realizing the darker side of her live. The calm messages, the friendly tone, the casual invite. All of it now felt like bait instead of vibe. Officers started asking me questions right away, confirming I wasn't part of it, if I knew her beforehand, if I had seen anything suspicious before entering the flat. I kept repeating the same truth. Met online. First time visiting. Nothing seemed off until tonight. My voice didn't even feel like mine while I spoke. She didn't fight much. Didn't scream. Just looked numb now, like the performance was finally over. Like she'd known exactly what she'd been doing and accepted the inevitable. I watched them lead her out, cuffs on. No dramatic scene. Just quiet consequences unfolding right in front of me. The other guy sat on the sofa after being checked over, wrapped in a blanket, visibly shaken. His eyes looked hollow, like he'd been waiting too long for someone to notice. The realization that I could have ended up the same way hit hard. Not because she targeted me, but because I trusted the situation too easily. Police remained for what felt like forever, checking every corner, asking more questions, documenting everything. I stood there feeling like a stranger inside someone else's chaos, unsure how I'd even get home after all this. When they finally let me leave, I walked down the same stairs I'd climbed earlier, only now everything felt heavier. The night air felt colder, sharper, more real. Street lights blurred slightly from the adrenaline still buzzing in my chest. I kept thinking about how casual the invitation was, how normal it all looked, how easily the line between safe and unsafe blurred. Back home, I sat on my bed staring at the wall for a long time, not able to fully wrap my head around how close I'd been to something a lot darker than I ever wanted near my name. I didn't rush to tell everyone. I didn't post anything. I just let the reality settle quietly, knowing this wasn't something you shake off quickly. It started with one of those reckless yes moments, where you reply before thinking and only realize later you probably should have stayed on your sofa. I had been bored all day, scrolling with zero energy, and then his message came through suggesting a night drive. No set plan, just music and whatever roads looked quiet. It sounded chill, dangerously chill in hindsight, but at that time I just wanted air, movement, something different from the same four walls I keep living. He pulled up in a dark car that looked too clean for how old it was, parked under a flickering streetlight like it was part of the scenery. When I slid into the passenger seat, it smelt faintly of petrol and some sharp cologne that didn't feel friendly. We didn't really talk much. He just drove, smooth and focused, one hand on the wheel, the other on his phone every now and then like he was checking instructions or timing something. I tried to act normal, cracked jokes, commented on random things I saw outside, but his replies stayed short and flat. At first, the drive was fine. Normal roads, half-empty roundabouts, sleepy houses, the kind of streets where windows glow and people are curled up watching whatever they always watch. Then gradually the area shifted. Shops closed. Lights thinner. Buildings wider. Concrete colder. He kept taking turns without explaining, and my phone signal dropped until it barely loaded anything. We pulled into a stretch that looked like it belonged in an abandoned industrial park. Closed warehouses. Rusted fences. Massive dark shapes piled up like sleeping giants. I remember thinking, why here? Why not a viewpoint or somewhere with actual life? He slowed down near one of the buildings, turned the engine off, and just sat there staring ahead. Not looking at me. Not speaking. Just still. My chest tightened. I told myself maybe he just wanted quiet. Maybe this was his version of calm. But then he reached into the back seat and lifted a large dark bag. Not casual. Not playful. Careful. Deliberate. He stepped out without saying anything and walked towards another car that had been parked further down the lot, barely visible until its faint lights flickered on. I stayed frozen inside his car, watching him move between the two vehicles like he'd done this before. The bag looked heavy, like it held something that wasn't meant to be touched lightly. He opened the boot of the other car and placed it in, then came back for another, and another. Every movement felt rehearsed, timed, familiar. My heart started racing in that way where your stomach feels hollow and your brain won't catch up. I glanced around to see if anyone was nearby, but the entire place felt deserted. No voices, no movement. Just wind brushing along metal walls and my own breathing sounding louder than it should. By the time he returned to his seat, I couldn't pretend it was normal anymore. He didn't even look sorry for leaving me sitting there confused. He just turned the ignition like nothing odd had happened and began driving again, deeper into the area, further from anything that felt safe. I watched the warehouses slide past the window and wondered what exactly I'd stepped into. My thoughts were racing through every worst-case possibility. Illegal drop-off, stolen goods, Some hidden network I definitely didn't want associated with my name. I wanted out but didn't know when it was safe to say I was uncomfortable. Then the blue lights came. They flashed suddenly from every direction, lighting up the entire concrete stretch like a strobe. Sirens echoed off the metal walls. His car jerked to a stop instantly like he knew this was coming. I stiffened in my seat as unmarked cars rolled in from both ends, blocking us, surrounding us, trapping us in the middle. Undercover officers stepped out fast, sharp, serious, no hesitation in their movements. Weapons visible. Eyes locked. Instructions shouted. His hands went up without argument. I felt my entire body go cold, not scared of them, but scared of what this meant I had been sitting next to this whole time. They pulled him out of the car and pushed him forward. Another officer opened my door and told me to step out too while keeping their eyes on me, like I could just as easily be part of whatever was going on. I stumbled onto the rough ground, heart pounding so loud I could hear it in my ears. The bags he transferred were being opened at the same time. Contents checked. Luds pulled on. Radio chatter flying back and forth. Their faces stayed serious the entire time, like this wasn't their first time dealing with someone like him. Like he already belonged to a known pattern they'd been waiting to close in on. I kept trying to process how a casual drive turned into this nightmare. I'd gotten into a car thinking it would just be dark roads and messy conversation. Not this. Not flashing lights and strangers with badges treating the night like a sting operation straight out of a true crime show. They separated us instantly, officers questioning me, searching my bag, scanning my phone. I answered everything honestly, still half shocked, repeating the same simple truth. I met him online. I didn't know about the bags. I didn't know where we were going. I just came for a drive. Meanwhile, he was being restrained, searched, surrounded, his calm mask finally starting to break as reality closed in on him. But even then, he didn't look at me. Not once. Like I was never relevant to his plan. Just another body in the seat who could have been anyone. I stood under a harsh temporary light while wind pushed dust across the ground, feeling exposed and stupid and unsettled all at once. I kept replaying the beginning in my head. The casual invite. The quiet car. The way he avoided basic conversation. Every detail suddenly made sense in the worst way. After what felt like forever, they finally told me I wasn't under arrest, but I'd need to give a statement later. They explained he was already being monitored, that the warehouse meetup was part of an ongoing operation, and I had unknowingly been picked up mid-drop. They didn't make me feel dramatic or hysterical. Just unlucky. Just near the wrong person. I watched as they drove him away, the sound of tires on concrete fading into the distance, and suddenly the silence felt heavier than the flashing lights ever had. They offered me a lift home, but I just nodded without really thinking, my mind still looping through the entire night like it didn't fully register yet. On the way back, every street light felt brighter. Every passing car felt like a reminder of how easily I could have been caught in something far darker than boredom and curiosity. The air felt different. The world felt a little less playful. When I finally stepped back inside my own space, I didn't rush to text anyone or over-explain. I just sat there for a while, letting the weight of what happened settle slowly. Knowing that I'd met someone who smiled like a normal guy, spoke like one too, but was living an entirely separate life right next to me. I still laugh in my head when I think about how casual it all felt at first, like it was just another random night I'd almost canceled out. I remember standing by my mirror thinking this one would probably end up like the others, awkward, forced, a polite goodbye, and a silent promise to never meet again. But something about her profile made me curious. Not in a deep way, just that low-effort kind of interest where you think, why not? She picked the place. A quiet rooftop bar overlooking the city, the type with tiny lights and soft music that makes everything feel way more serious than it actually is. When I got there, the sky was dark, but the city was glowing, and she was already sat at a corner table like she owned the view. She didn't wave or smile the way most people do. She just looked up slowly and nodded like she expected me. I sat down and tried to relax, tried to remember this was meant to be normal and not some weird audition I didn't sign up for. She moved her phone a lot. That was the first thing I noticed. Not even in a distracted way. Wanted she was positioning it. Adjusting the angle. Tilting it slightly. Every time I shifted, she shifted it too. At first, I told myself she was just filming the skyline or taking aesthetic clips for socials. Loads of people do that now, but it got stranger. She kept glancing at the screen, then back at me, then back at the screen again. Her thumb moved in a way that didn't look like scrolling. It looked like she was managing something. I spotted a tiny reflection of a red dot in the glass of her screen, and my stomach dropped a bit. I tried to shake it off and kept talking about random stuff. Yumi, work, how weird dating apps are now. She barely reacted to anything I said, just half smiled, nodded, adjusted the phone again. Then it hit me that the phone was aimed directly at me, not the view, not her drink, not the skyline. Me, like I was the subject. Her eyes weren't on me properly either. They were more focused on the screen, watching me through it instead of looking at my actual face. I started feeling like I was being watched by more than just her, like there was an invisible audience. The air felt heavier without anything actually changing. I asked if everything was cool, tried to keep it light, but even then her response felt delayed, like she was more focused on something else happening in real time. I couldn't hear anything from the phone, but I knew what it was. She was live streaming, not recording for later. Live. There was no other reason for the way she kept checking comments or tapping the same part of the screen repeatedly. I just sat there feeling exposed without knowing who was on the other side. I started to notice tiny details I should have seen sooner. The way her bag was positioned on the floor, half open, wires inside, another phone maybe. The way she angled her body slightly away from me but kept the lens perfectly lined up with my face and chest. Her smile didn't reach her eyes. It was mirroring what she thought someone wanted to see instead of what she actually felt. My mind went into overdrive. I wondered if I was being made into a meme. A joke. Some cringe content for strangers to laugh at. I imagined comments flying in, people rating me, mocking me, screenshotting my face. I felt stupid for not realizing sooner. I felt played. I shifted in my seat and she adjusted again instantly, as if she couldn't allow me to move out of frame for even a second. I leaned back and glanced around and noticed a few people nearby looking our way more than normal, like they were aware something strange was happening but didn't want to involve themselves. I honestly considered just walking out, but something held me there. Confusion maybe. Shock. Curiosity. Fear mixed with self-doubt. Then the entire mood changed in seconds. There was a sudden heavy footstep sound behind me, then another, then shouted instructions filling the roofed-up air. Armed police flooded the space from both stair exits, moving fast, focused, serious. Not casual security. Not a warning. Full presence. Voices sharp. People standing up. Chairs scraping. Glasses clinking. Everyone frozen. She didn't even look surprised. That was the scariest part. Her face barely changed. No panic. No protest. Just a slight sigh, like someone who knew a timer had just run out. Officers moved towards our table, and one of them pointed straight at her phone, telling her to put it down. She didn't argue. She obeyed instantly. I sat there stunned as they took her devices, pulling more electronics from her bag than I even thought was possible. More phones. Power banks. Maybe even a small camera rig. It was like she came prepared for a whole production, not a first date. They cuffed her while explaining to her that she was under arrest for running an online blackmail ring, baiting people through dates, and broadcasting them to paying viewers who would later receive edited footage to pressure victims for money. I felt like the floor tilted under me. Everything I thought was happening suddenly twisted into something way darker. I wasn't just her awkward date. I was a prop content, part of a system. Something repeatable. My chest felt tight while I realized how many people before me probably sat in that same chair, across from that same calm smile, thinking they were just meeting someone from an app. My phone buzzed in my pocket, and when I looked at it, I saw a message from an unknown number with a screenshot of me on the rooftop, taken seconds earlier, along with a line saying prove your loyalty or this gets sent to everyone. That was when I knew just how real it was and how much I had almost been pulled into something I didn't understand. She didn't fight it. Didn't scream. Didn't look at me once while they led her away. Just kept that detached expression like none of it mattered anymore. Like I was just another face in a long list she no longer cared about. After they took her, the rooftop felt empty even though people were still closing tabs and whispering. Police asked me questions, checked my phone, confirmed I wasn't part of it. I sat there explaining everything with shaky hands, still trying to process how a quiet drink turned into that mess. I kept replaying small moments in my head, every time she adjusted the phone, every delayed smile, Every second, she chose the screen over looking at me properly. When I finally left and walked down the staircase, the night air felt colder than before. Not dramatic cold, just real. Grounded, like I was stepping back into something normal after being dragged briefly into someone else's twisted web. I didn't feel lucky or relieved. I just felt wired and unsettled, like I'd seen behind a curtain I didn't ask to go near. Dating stopped feeling harmless after that. Every notification, every match, every suggestion felt slightly off, slightly risky, like a reminder that sometimes you're not just meeting a person, you're stepping into their whole hidden world without knowing the rules.